Good morning and welcome to the Faces of Fraud Generation Seminar, Trends, Identification, Prevention, and Reporting. I'm Dawn Millette, an associate professor within the School of Education at Colorado State University. I'm also the coordinator for the undergraduate degree program in Family and Consumer Sciences. I was personally thrilled when I, as the coordinator for the FCS program, was approached with the opportunity to be one of the hosts of this timely and relevant topic, consumer fraud. The topic of consumer fraud aligns perfectly with the mission of our Family and Consumer Sciences program. The mission of our interdisciplinary program is to prepare professionals dedicated to enhancing the well-being of individuals, families, and the communities and environments in which they live and work. Family and consumer science students attain knowledge, skills, dispositions, and perspectives to assist families and consumers with quality of life decisions and challenges. In addition, as the Colorado Land Grant Institution, Colorado State University is committed to excellence, setting the standard in teaching, research, service, and extension outreach for the benefit of the citizens in Colorado, the United States, and the world. Fraud can have a significant impact on one's quality life and provides those individuals impacted with life-changing challenges. Fraud does not discriminate. It impacts individuals of all ages and stages of life. That is why we titled this a Generations Seminar. We are excited that attending today's seminar are teenagers, college students, millennials and/or Gen X and Yers, baby boomers, and those in their golden years. That is exactly what we were hoping for, to educate across generations. It is our hope that by educating all of you, you will in turn share this information with your family, friends, colleagues, and others so that we as a collective can work together to identify, prevent, and report fraud and financial exploitation. Every day, hundreds of individuals lose their savings and hard-earned cash to fraudulent schemes. To combat fraud and protect individuals and families from predatory cyber criminals, we have put together an excellent lineup of speakers who will provide you with information to help you recognize, prevent, and strike back against scammers. So grab a donut or bagel, a cup of coffee or tea, gather your notebook, and sit back to hear what someday could end up being one of the most important seminars you've attended. With that, I would like to introduce to you Mike Schneider, the Denver FBI Special Agent in charge. Thank you, Mike.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Michael Schneider. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the FBI Denver Field Office. I want to personally welcome you and thank you for attending today's virtual event on fraud events and how different generations are targeted. On behalf of the FBI Denver Field Office, I want to start by thanking the Colorado State University for hosting us and our partners on your virtual platform. I was told the platform can accommodate up to 10,000 people, so clearly this is not an FBI platform. Sometimes we're challenged with having 2 people on our platforms. We are good at many things. Information technology may not be one of our strong points. For those of you who are familiar with the FBI, we have a saying that we like to proudly display around the office, that we have yesterday's technology today. So we really appreciate the opportunity to leverage our private sector and academic partnerships to allow us to be successful. I'd also like to thank FBI Denver's Citizens Academy Alumni Association for helping us craft the agenda and getting the message out to all of you on this really important topic. It affects all citizens. From those of us that send pizza money to our friends via peer-to-peer like Venmo, and to those of us who routinely get targeted by scammers trying to separate us from our money that we keep stored in our mattresses at home. To give you some perspective of why we're facilitating this training today, I thought I would highlight a few eye-opening statistics. Year 2020, a year that most of us are looking to putting behind us, has been incredibly lucrative to financial fraudsters. The number of financial fraud victims this year to date has more than doubled from last year, and the total estimated loss has increased by about 125% to approximately $6.4 billion. While much of today's discussion is focused on frauds targeting our more mature population, it is important to note that this is a problem that impacts all age groups. No one is immune to being targeted. The intent of today is to share meaningful information from several different organizations and provide overall awareness and strategies to combat fraud. You're going to hear from the FBI, the IRS, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the United States Postal Inspection Service, and AARP. All these agencies will provide you with a better understanding of current fraud trends, the persuasion tactics that are being used, how you should go about reporting fraud, and some helpful prevention measures. We hope the information shared today makes you better informed and therefore makes you a harder target. We also hope it makes you feel more comfortable discussing fraud with others. We do realize this event is going to take a significant portion of your day, and for this we thank you. We're all in this together. As long as it is lucrative for criminals to target us, they will continue to do so. It is the law enforcement community's job to create consequences for the criminals, and it's all our job to protect ourselves from being a victim. Before we go, I also want to take a minute to thank our moderator, Matt Federoff of AARP's ElderWatch. The ElderWatch helpline is a wonderful resource for all ages on all things fraud. Mark, thank you for facilitating today's events and making sure the information is presented in a digestible format. Let's get on with the event. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the discussion.
Oh, sorry, I was just told I was on mute. It is 2020. Thank you all, thank you all, and thank you, Special Agent Schneider, for that introduction, and a big thank you to CSU for hosting today's event. My name is Mark, and I'm with AARP, and I have the honor of guiding you through today's event, hopefully not too many mute mistakes as we move forward. I would first like to start by introducing our very distinguished panel of federal agencies that are represented today. First of all, Rebecca Franciscus, Senior Counsel for Regional Operation with SEC's Enforcement Division. She has investigated thousands of investment frauds and scams, including Ponzi schemes, offerings fraud, insider trading, and market manipulation during her 20 years with the Commission. Rebecca was a private securities litigation attorney with multiple national law firms in New York prior to joining the SEC. Since she's been with the SEC for 20 years, that means Rebecca must have started there when she was 13. Rebecca, welcome, and will you tell us just a little bit about the work that you do with the SEC and SEC's role?
Thank you, Mark, for that kind introduction. And yes, I keep telling my children that, yes, I started working at 13 and they need to get themselves to the office today. So as Mark said, I am an enforcement attorney with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. And of course, as a federal agent, I have to disclaim responsibility for everything I'm going to say first. So these views today represent my views and not necessarily those of the Commission or my fellow staff members. So the SEC is actually an elite federal agency that is focused on the financial markets. We have about 4,600 employees, so we're fairly lean by government standards. And we work from our main office in Washington, D.C., and then our 11 regional offices around the country, including the Denver regional office. So my jurisdiction, my territory includes all the states between North Dakota and New Mexico and Kansas and Utah. So we cover a wide swath of the Rocky Mountain region. The SEC's mission is a three-part mission. Number one, we facilitate capital formation. So this means that we help companies raise money for their endeavors, whether it's an initial public offering on the public markets, all the way down to crowdfunding for smaller companies on a small platform. Our second goal as an agency is to maintain fair, orderly, and efficient markets. What this means is that we regulate The national stock exchanges, including the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, and the 26 other exchanges you may not even know of. Additionally, we regulate broker-dealers, investment advisors, and those who help you invest for retirement. And my favorite third prong of our mission is to protect investors. And we do that in two ways. Like me, we bring cases against individuals who violate the federal securities laws. We are a law enforcement arm. Unlike my colleagues, however, I do not carry a weapon or a badge, so I'm the least cool agency here today. However, we also protect investors, and it is my joy to empower investors, because the worst feeling as a law enforcement provider is when you can't return money to harmed investors who have been victims of scams. So our goal today is to empower and educate you so that you can be a better consumer, a better investor, and make wise investment choices. Thank you, Mark, and thank you to our entire panel of amazing colleagues here today, and to CSU for hosting us. Back at you, Mark.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Our next panelist is Eric Manuel. Eric is a postal inspector with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. Inspector Manuel is currently serving a temporary assignment as at the National Public Information Office agency headquarters in Washington, D.C. In his regular assignment, Inspector Manuel is assigned to the Narcotics, Indirection, and Investigation team in the Denver office, where he has also served for 5 years on the mail identity theft team and detailed as supervisor for the white-collar mail fraud team. Overall, Inspector Manuel has over 12 years of law enforcement experience. Welcome, Eric, and will you just tell us a little bit more about your work?
Sure, thank you, Mark, and welcome to the rest of the panel. I'm glad to be here today and have this great opportunity to speak to this broad group with a lot of different generations on the call, because that's really plays right into our hand with our fraud prevention efforts here at the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are actually the nation's oldest federal law enforcement agency. We were founded back by Benjamin Franklin back in 1787. So we've been around for quite a while. We've been around doing this job for many, many years. And the nice thing is we have a lot of years of experience in seeing all the fraud scams that have come up over the years, and we tend to see cycles. And so we have a lot of information that we like to share today, but on a day-to-day basis, we're growing and expanding our efforts to protect the nation's mail, the nation's postal system, postal employees, and postal infrastructure. We are federal agents just like FBI, DEA, ATF, and we do all the same criminal investigations as those agents do. But we also have some unique connections to the Postal Service and unique access to their facilities and to their employees. So one of the things that we'll often do is investigate crimes that have any connection to the mail. So if there is fraud using the mail, theft of the mail, bombs or criminal misuse of devices placed in the mail, narcotics sent through the mail. We also protect employees from robberies and facilities from burglaries, and all sorts of varied things to protect the Postal Service, ensure its safe operation, ensure the integrity of the mail in that process. So that's a small snippet of what we do on a daily basis. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks so much, Eric. Really interesting, and you all at the Postal Inspection Service play such a critical role. Our next guest is Scott Schoens. Scott Schoens is Supervisory Special Agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He is responsible for the White Collar Crime Program for the Denver Division. Scott has investigated all FBI priorities, including counterintelligence, terrorism, violent crimes, cyber, and complex financial crimes during his 22-year career. Welcome, Scott. Will you tell us a little bit more about your work?
Thanks, Mark. Excited to be here and share information today about different fraud trends with everybody. The FBI is responsible for investigating all violations of federal crimes. Those violations include wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and they span across several different types of activities, including internet fraud, investment fraud, lottery schemes, identity theft, timeshare fraud, and many others that we'll be talking about here today. The FBI investigates these crimes with our special agents that are assigned across 56 major field offices in the United States, as well as agents that we have located in foreign countries. Having agents in foreign countries when we're dealing with fraud investigations is extremely important because a lot of times these frauds originate from overseas and/or the funds end up overseas. So we have agents overseas that work with law enforcement in foreign countries that are able to further our investigations, identify individuals, and extradite individuals back to the United States. In addition to working with our foreign partners, we also work with state, local, and federal partners here in the United States, making sure that we're deconflicting our investigations when we conduct them, also working in task force environments with a lot of the partners that are on the call here today. We also rely a lot on the public for assistance in our investigations. It's important that we receive tips of criminal activities, no matter how small that activity is. Even if you are not a victim, have not lost money to one of these frauds, reporting that information is extremely important so we can complete an investigation. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, Scott. And it's great to have you here. And I know that there's always lots of questions for the FBI. So prepare your questions for as you hear about these wonderful things all these folks do, because I'm sure there's lots of them to come. Our last panelist but not least, definitely, is George Warnock. He's a supervisory special agent with the Department of Treasury, Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation in the Denver Field Office. And George has been employed with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division for 10 years, and he has investigated numerous crimes, including violations of the Federal Income Tax Code, investment fraud, mortgage fraud, and identity theft. Welcome, George, and will you tell us a little bit more about your work at the IRS?
Yes, thank you, Mark, and thanks everybody for having us today. We're always excited to be included in a presentation with FBI and Postal and SEC to share kind of the things and the frauds that we are interested in getting information to you. As Mark said, I work for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Within the IRS, we have a civil division, which most people would be the only people they deal with. They handle things like audits. On the criminal side, we are interested in prosecuting people who violate the Internal Revenue Code or the laws around collecting taxes in the country. We have agents spread across the entire country as well as some foreign countries. We currently have around 3,000 special agents working to enforce the tax code. As well as the tax crimes, we also work collaboratively with all of these other panelists like the SEC, Postal, and FBI, and we'll often work money laundering or the money side of different investment schemes and/or frauds. So we're super excited to be here with you and share some information with you today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, George. It's great to have you here. And for anyone who thinks that the IRS is boring, the work of these agents is really, really interesting. So I'm sure that George will have a lot to share in terms of what's going on today. And I think the work they do is fascinating. So hopefully you have some questions ready for George as well. And just to round things out, my name is Mark Vetterhoff. I am the program manager for AARP Elder Watch here in Colorado. And AARP Elder Watch is a partnership between AARP and the Colorado Attorney General's Office. It's been around for almost 20 years, and we work really closely with the Attorney General's Office to educate specifically older consumers about frauds and scams, but we really are here to help everyone, and hopefully you all can understand a little bit more about the work that we do, to understand how important it is that the education that we're doing for older adults is really for everyone, because scams are targeted for everyone. And again, I'm really happy that everyone's here today to join our very special federal partners in learning more about all the frauds and scams that are out there and how we approach them. So just to get us started today, next slide, please. This is kind of what the schedule looks like for today. We're going to get on the same page about what fraud is. We're going to talk really in depth about some trending scams that our federal agents are seeing. We're going to talk about persuasion tactics used by scammers. We're also going to have a very brief intermission. If you need that bio break, just know that that's on the schedule. We're going to talk about payment methods and movements of funds, reporting, investigation, and of course, question and answers. So please, as you are on today, develop those question answers, put them in the box, and we will address as many as we can at the end of today's session. Next slide, please. So to get us all on the same page, what is fraud and what is a scam? Well, I love going back to the dictionary definitions. And so just up on the screen here are Webster's definitions of frauds and scams. So intentional persuasion or of truth in order to induce another to part with something of value or to surrender a legal right. An act of deceiving or misrepresenting. So that's the one I probably use more often, the act of deceiving or misrepresenting. So what we're talking about today really has to do with deception and misinterpretation. A scam, again, a fraudulent or deceptive act or operation. So that's the actual act of the deception that we're talking about today. Next slide, please. So we'll be referring to some numbers from the Federal Trade Commission, and the Federal Trade Commission really is kind of the collector of all information about frauds and scams in the country from all the different agencies. And they really do gather all this information in what's called the Consumer Sentinel. And the Consumer Sentinel is where lots of state attorney generals, where AARP, where the Better Business Bureau, and other federal agencies kind of collect all the information about all the different types of frauds and scams that are out there. So in 2019, the FTC collected 3.2 million reports of different types of frauds and scams and consumer violations. You can see the top three categories: identity theft, which we'll be talking about today, imposter scams, which we will of course be talking about today, and then telephone and mobile services. And so those fall more under business complaints, just to clarify that point. So 1.7 million fraud reports, and most of those are on the kind of direct frauds and scams that we'll be talking about today. You can see that there's lots of losses associated with the different types of frauds and scams. $320 is the median loss, 1.9 billion fraud losses total. And I think it's really important when you're looking at these numbers, you understand that most people don't report frauds and scams. And so it's really critical to understand that these numbers are terribly low. And so if everyone was reporting, these numbers would be quite a bit higher. And so we're looking at billions and billions in the losses. Lots of people estimate well over 3 billion in losses per year to fraud. Next slide, please. Just some more really important numbers from the FTC, and that really touch upon the generational event that we're talking about today. So you'll see this statistic in the upper left-hand corner. Younger people are actually reporting more in terms of losing money to fraud than older people. So you can see there 33% of reported folks who lost money were in the ages of 20 to 29. So that surprises a lot of people. And 13% of the people who were reporting were 70 to 79. So that, again, that's a surprising number for a lot of people. But the really important thing to know about this is that the older populations are losing more money when they do lose money to fraud. So you can see that other graph, median losses for the 20 to 29 population is $448, as opposed to the 80 plus population, which is well over $1,600 a median loss. So it's important to remember that everyone is really being targeted by frauds and scams, but also knowing that when we're talking about losing money, it's older populations that are generally losing more, generally because they have more wealth as a whole. We'll be talking a lot about imposter scams today, and imposter scams, generally government imposter scams, someone posing to be someone else. And you can see right there that the imposter scams are definitely one of the most critical of the scams that are reported to the FTC. And it really equate to a lot of losses there. $700 median losses, $670 million reported loss to imposter scams as a whole. And identity theft, again, is a really critical issue, and George will be talking more about that with relation to taxes as well. Next slide, please. So who are scammers going after? I think I answered that already, but it's everyone. It's not just older adults. It's not just younger people. There's a scam for everyone. What is their goal? They want to get your money, or they want to get your personal information. And it's critical that you remember that as you're giving out any of that information. Stop and remember what is critical, and stop and realize what your vulnerabilities are. And I think that, you know, if we all take a minute during today's presentation and realize your vulnerabilities, you'll realize what scams that you really are likely, that you could be vulnerable to. I would say that, you know, the example that I give for myself, just to get everyone on track here, is that I really like going to sporting events and concerts. So I would say that my vulnerability might be a ticket scam. And we do hear about ticket scams fairly regularly. Not right now. I would say 2020 has probably been the year that we've heard less ticket scams than any time ever before, just because there aren't really any in-person events. But a ticket scam would be one, because I like going to Broncos games, I like going to Nuggets games, I like going to concerts. That might be the scam I'm most vulnerable to. I'd really like to hear from our panel of experts about what scams they might be most vulnerable to. Rebecca, what about you?
Absolutely. Well, again, my vulnerability currently is that I have teenage daughters who are starting the application process to college, and I am particularly vulnerable right now to anything that would help me as an investment to pay for college. It's a big concern of mine. I'm open to listening to information about how to pay for college. So if somebody were to offer me a way to ensure that I could make sure my kids' college was covered, that would be a scam I would definitely be vulnerable to. Thanks, Mark.
What about you, Eric? What is a scam that you might be vulnerable to?
Well, with us, you know, any scam that touches the mail brings into the question of, you know, once it enters the mail stream, how does it get brought to our attention? And many people don't realize that not every single piece of mail is scanned and notified, you know, to postal inspectors. So there are millions and millions and millions of pieces of mail in the system at any given time. And so if you fall victim to any of these scams discussed here today, and you place something in the mail stream, often we'll get requests for postal inspectors to run out there and intercept that letter before it gets to its destination and sends off those funds of yours that are being sent to a scammer, and you've already realized it and placed it in the mail, and now you want to intercept it. There are very limited circumstances where we've been able to successfully do that. Otherwise, if we can't intercept it, we have to wait for the investigation and the whole situation to develop, right? So we want people to know that pay attention to these prevention tips that we provide today, and understand that there are many things that you can do to watch the warning signs to avoid being duped into putting your information into the mail and prevent those situations from happening. But if you do happen to put something in the mail and there's an issue, a concern with a fraudulent scam you may have been victimized with, we'll let you know how to report it by going to our website or calling our 800 number and letting postal inspectors know that we can follow up with that and give us every bit of information that we can gather to be able to follow back those scammers and make it right for you in the end.
Thanks, Eric. Is there just thinking about it, is there a personally, do you think there's a scam that you might be personally vulnerable to that you've heard about out there?
Yeah, most recently we'll talk about the ever-changing scams surrounding coronavirus and all of the new takes that we'll see on things like offering PPE, protective equipment, for sale and offering expedited shipping if you pay an extra fee, for example. That might be a big sign. If something's coming from China and they can get it here in 2 days, that's pretty unlikely, right? So we have to watch out for those types of scams regarding PPE.
Definitely. Thanks a lot for that. How about you, Scott? Is there a scam that you know you think you might catch you up one time?
Yeah, I think the most recent one that I've seen that I think I would fall victim to possibly is access to my iCloud account. It's a recent scam that's out there where you get contacted and told that you no longer have access to your iCloud account unless you pay a fee. And having a family and everyone sharing their photos and all their data on the iCloud account, if that was to be gone, definitely something I look at twice when I get that call or that email on.
Oh, I agree. Those are very, very tricky. I'm sure that there are many people on today's event that have seen some really tricky phishing with regard to iCloud accounts as well. Thanks a lot for that. George, how about you? Is there a scam that you've seen that you think you might be personally vulnerable to?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And actually, to kind of go along with what Scott said, I think a lot of these email phishing attempts lately are pretty sophisticated and look very much like the actual commercial entity that they're representing. So just recently, actually, we had our credit card got compromised, which, you know, is a big hassle, and you've got to go and redo your credit card and all your automatic payments and things. And at the same time, I was getting some of these phishing emails from Netflix or from Spotify or these different services that we have contracts with and do business with, and basically they look very official, and they say, you know, your payment hasn't gone through, your account's going to be suspended. And working from home and have a lot of kids here, you know, what are they going to do if the Netflix account isn't working? So those things are very tempting to just quickly click on the link in there to solve that problem, but you have to kind of take a step back. And I think a lot of these scams, that's what they rely on, is getting you to click that link or getting you on the phone quickly before you're really thinking through whether this makes sense or not. And for example, is my Netflix account even disabled right now? Can I go log into it right now? And if you can, then it's probably not really Netflix. But those type of scams, I think right now are pretty sophisticated and look very legitimate, and would be one that I would fall victim to.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think those, especially some of the best phishing scams that I've seen, have been those Netflix accounts. And since so many people are reliant on online accounts right now, it is just really critical to understand what your correspondence looks like from all those entities. And George, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think I've definitely heard of Netflix accounts, Amazon accounts, other bank accounts where scammers have really done a good job of being able to mimic what their actual emails look like. And it can trip up, if it can trip up a federal agent, it can probably trip up anyone, right? So be very cautious about that. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do now is really talk about some of the trending scams and have our experts fill you in on some of the trending scams that we're hearing about and that we want you to know about, so you can identify them, refuse them, and report them. We're going to cover sweepstakes, prize, and lottery scams, government imposter scams, tax and identity theft, COVID-related scams involving PPE and unemployment, as Eric said, Ponzi pyramid schemes, timeshare, romance scams, business email compromise, digital currency, and some other scams of note that are trending at the moment. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric, and he's going to talk first about sweepstakes, prize, and lottery scams.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, sweepstakes, prize, and lottery scams are definitely one of the postal inspector's bread and butter. This dates back to when the mail fraud statute was first formed in 1872. Postal inspectors have been investigating these scams ever since then, and they just don't stop. We just see new variations of them as the current trends shift. Every day there's new trends and spins on these old scams. But essentially what a sweepstakes or lottery scam entails is you'll receive a solicitation any number of different ways, whether that's through the mail or by a telephone call, a scam call, or an email, or any other type of solicitation claiming that you have won a prize. And often it's they try to mask it to make it seem like it's the Mega Millions or the Publishers Clearinghouse, or maybe it's a lottery from Canada or another country, and it'll claim that you've won a vast amount of money, and all you have to do to claim your winnings is to pay a small fee up front for processing for international taxes or some international transfer fee or some other mechanism to be able to release the funds to you. And so the first thing that we often encourage people to think about when they hear these types of things is, did I actually enter any such lottery, right? And it's hard to remember sometimes all the different places we put our email and contact information out there. But many people often know when they sign up for a lottery or a sweepstakes, right? Because you're expecting a prize and you know what you're putting in for. But if you receive a solicitation for something that doesn't sound like something you've ever entered, or if it's ever in an international country, that should be a huge red flag. There'll be no reason why you could ever win a sweepstakes in another country when you haven't entered, and it's also against the law. So what happens though is if you're asked to pay a fee to release these funds to you, you'll pay this to the scammer a number of different ways. They may ask for you to send it via Cash Apps or via wire transfers or via mobile apps, or they may send it via the mail. Well, if you send it through the mail, that's where we trigger our jurisdiction. But any of those scams often affect the mail, whether they send a letter to start with, or a bill, or some sort of communication. And once you pay those fees, they will then get back to you and say, guess what? There's more fees that you have to pay to get your winnings. And it's just an ever continuing cycle of, oh gosh, we forgot to tell you about this other fee. And we promise we'll get you your $3 million or whatever it is. But we just need another $1,500 to pay those fees we weren't expecting. And unfortunately, we've seen people pay tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to these scammers in the hopes of receiving millions, but it never comes. So one thing we often encourage people is to look for the misspellings in these emails and these letter solicitations, because it's a dead giveaway. They're often being written in foreign countries where people's English is not as perfect as ours, and they often make very key misspellings on what look to be official documents. So that would never happen if it's coming from an official source. So postal inspectors will work for that. Look for those types of clues. And if you ever fall victim to one of these, or even get one in the mail, please report it to us on our website and retain the original letter and the envelope, and provide as much information about the scammer and any contact you've had with them to postal inspectors, so that we can track back this activity and try and determine the source and bring people to justice.
Thanks, Eric. This is the scam that I wish would go away, and I think that it's just really critical to underline the fact that you should never have to pay money to receive money, and I really hope that maybe one day this message will get out to everyone and that scam will be eradicated. But thanks so much for filling us in on the details of the sweepstakes prize and lottery scams. I literally just talked to someone who calls our helpline about once a month yesterday. And it was a woman in southern Colorado, and she always wants to just verify that these attempts that she's getting are actually fraudulent, just because she does kind of wish that money was real. But we definitely, at the Elder Watch helpline, we will definitely tell her every time that she should never pay money to receive money. And so it's a really critical thing to remember. So next, let's hear from George and Rebecca a little bit about government imposter scams.
Great, thank you, Mark. And yeah, so these type of scams, I don't think are as old as the lottery scams like Eric just mentioned. In fact, even in my career, and I've been with IRS for about 10 years now, I don't remember a ton of these imposter scams where people try to pretend to be agents from a federal agency to get information and or money out of victims. I think they're really kind of common within the last 5 years or so, and really increasing now. I know that on my personal cell phone, as our cell phone kind of numbers get leaked, I start to get a lot of these calls from different people claiming to be with different government agencies. So I'm sure that many of you on the call now have gotten these scams before. So we wanted to make sure we touch on those. And basically these government imposter scams can come either by phone or by email with those phishing attempts, but we'll talk about the phone first. And specifically for the IRS, we're concerned because I know I got a call just last week from a person claiming to be with the IRS and that I was in trouble and that I needed to contact them immediately to resolve my issue of my unpaid taxes. So there's just some things we want to let you know. And most of these calls are either a person who will call you directly or what we call a robocall. So a robocall is when you answer your telephone and on the other line is a robotic voice, not an actual person who gives you instructions. For example, you know, we are with the IRS, press 1 to be connected to an agent. So we just want you to know that the actual IRS and the SSA and these different government agencies, they don't make robocalls. So that should be a giveaway right away, that if you answer your phone and it's one of these robotic calls that tells you to push a number to talk to someone, it's most likely some sort of scam, and you should just hang up the phone at that point. The ones that are a little bit more intriguing, I guess, are when they're actual live people. And so you'll answer the phone and they'll immediately tell you that they're with the IRS, I'm an agent with the IRS, and you have undue taxes and they need to verify some information. And so just so you know, again, with the IRS, our criminal agents could possibly call you like that, but they would never demand to verify personal information or ask you for any type of payment information or anything like that over the telephone. if you were ever going to be audited by the IRS from the examination function, they would never start with a phone call. So you would receive letters from them first on official IRS letterhead, and they would state exactly what the issue was with your taxes, and they would usually have a number for you to call them back. And you could put that number into Google and see that it comes back to an IRS office. A lot of times with these government imposter scams, they will be very demanding up front, and they're kind of looking for people who are vulnerable with, which a lot of us are, that you don't want to be in trouble with the IRS or with the Social Security Administration. You want to make sure everything's straight. But so they'll be very demanding right away and say, you know, what is your Social Security number? What is your date of birth? And if you provide them with that information, it just leads to you being vulnerable to a lot of other type of scams, which we will talk about later. So you don't want to give any type of that verifiable information over the phone to anybody. Really, the best way to stop these scams is just to hang up on them immediately. And as it becomes less lucrative to them, then they'll stop doing it, right? They're not interested in making these thousands of calls if they don't end up getting information or money out of some of their victims. The other ones that are interesting are these imposter scams through the email, which I touched on earlier when they said, what scam would you be vulnerable by? And these could also be government, and oftentimes it'll be websites that look very similar to the actual website. So the actual website for the IRS is www.irs.gov, right, with the government at the end. But there's also a website out there, www.irs.com, which is not affiliated with the IRS at all. And so many times they are sophisticated enough to put a link or to a website that looks very similar. But again, the IRS would not contact you by email. We would contact you by mail first, or if it was a phone call, you know, we would never ask for financial details like that, or threaten you with jail time if you don't comply. So let me turn it over to Rebecca, and she'll close off this section.
Thanks, George. Yeah, we have seen, in addition to government imposters, where they have spoofed our seals, all of us here, we have also seen an increase in just general imposter scams, especially at banks and brokerage firms where you hold your money. That is a high value target for scam artists, and they want you to click on the links or click on the email that looks legitimate. And one of the things that we have seen a huge increase in the past 6 months are fake CD sales offered by fake companies who claim to be FDIC insured and use seals from our government agencies and from banks and brokerage houses to offer those CDs to you. The reason that they are prevalent right now is that everyone's searching for interest rates. We're getting less than 1% in our savings accounts. We're all stressed out from the financial crisis of COVID. And so it makes us particularly vulnerable to those. So be careful that it's not just government impersonators and imposters, it is banks and brokerage houses as well. And one of the things that I really like that George said is he said to go independently verify the phone number or go independently verify the website that you are accessed. And so our rule of thumb is never respond to an incoming call. They have invaded your house, they have invaded your email, they have invaded your phone. That is not anyone you want to be responsible to or to even answer. So if you have a question that you've been contacted by a government official, if you have been contacted by your bank, stop. Ignore the email or the contact by which you received it and independently verify. Call the branch yourself, Google the address, Google the phone number directly, and get that information independently. And that right there will help prevent you from falling victim to these impersonator and imposter schemes. Thanks, George.
Great advice, George and Rebecca. That's really important. And I just want to debunk one really important myth about some of these imposter scams. Particularly the Social Security imposter scams, which we have seen as the #1 scam being reported to AARP over the past year. Social Security imposter scams are not just targeting older adults, and actually the people who we talk to who are actually being victimized by the scam, and when I say victimized, it's either someone who's giving personal information or giving their financial information, whether that means their Social Security number or paying someone. Is that lots of younger people are being victimized by this scam. Last week, I talked to 5 people in a row in their 20s who received this scam. So it's really, really critical that people of all ages that are sharing this information with one another, so they know that these Social Security imposter scams are really the #1 scam out there. And the scammers don't care who they're calling. They're calling everyone. older people, younger people, it doesn't matter. So be super cautious about this. Share that information that's coming from George and Rebecca and myself with your friends and family, because it's not just, a scam for seniors, or it's not just a scam for, 18-year-olds. It's a scam for everyone, and be super careful about it. Next slide, please. George, could you tell us a little bit more about tax identity theft?
Yes, I would love to talk about this. This is kind of the bread and butter of what we do, and one of our primary missions is tax related to identity theft and also tax preparer fraud. So we'll talk about the identity theft first, and it's actually kind of an area that surprised me when I got into this field. When I went through training, I thought most of the cases I would be working are kind of complex accounting type cases with people trying to evade taxes, but we actually deal with kind of a lot more of this identity theft and street level fraud that comes from it. And I think the reason why is a lot of people don't understand that you can, on your tax return, you can actually get money back more than you had withheld from your wages. And it's especially for younger people as well. So when you're working your normal job and you're making wages, your employer withholds some of your paycheck to cover your taxes. And usually for most people at the end of the year, that's the maximum amount that you would get back is what you had withheld. You wouldn't get a refund of just extra money over what was withheld. But there is a couple programs that the IRS administers, primarily the Earned Income Credit and the Additional Child Tax Credit, where you can actually get money back over what you put into the tax system. And that's what these identity theft thieves do. And so there's actually rings of people, and we don't have as many right now in Colorado, but it's more prevalent on the East Coast, that will steal people's identities and use that information for a variety of frauds, from opening credit card accounts to obtaining loans. And one of the things they do is also try to file a tax return before the actual victim does. And they will change information on that return and claim that they have a few kids and that their money, their income is just in the right amount to get those refundable credits, and they can get thousands of dollars per return in money back. And if they file 100 returns to get through, they just made hundreds of thousands of dollars. The problem that causes for the actual victim is now there's been a tax return filed in your name, and when you go to file your own correct tax return, they're going to tell you, I'm sorry, you already filed a tax return, which obviously you didn't. The scammers did. And it causes a number of headaches. They're trying to get that resolved. So the main reason we want to tell you about this is as these large data breaches occur, like at a Target or any of these large companies, Amazon, and all this information gets released, one of the things that people often don't think about is that their tax returns could also be compromised. So the biggest way to try to prevent that is try to file your taxes early, as soon as you're able to, before these fraudsters would be able to, if they have gotten your identity. And if you do realize that your identity was stolen, you can be proactive and call the IRS, and they can actually, once they determine that it was identity theft, get that false return removed and give you a PIN, so a number that you will then use on your other tax returns going forward to prove that it's actually you. And that way, if somebody else tries to file another tax return in your name, they won't have that PIN number and the IRS won't accept it. So there are procedures in place to combat that if you've fallen victim to that. The other way that people also use your identity is for employment status. So they could also come across your social security number and date of birth and then use that themselves to work if they are not legal to work in this country. That can also cause some problems. The next fraud we want to talk about, and this again can affect old people and younger people, but I think we are even seeing it more with younger people now, and that's actual preparer fraud. So a lot of people are surprised to learn that if you want to start preparing tax returns for other people, you don't have to go through any licensing or any training or any of that. You can just set up a shop and put George's taxes on the board and start preparing returns and submitting them to the IRS. And so what happens is there's a lot of unscrupulous tax return preparers who will bring people in and bring clients in, and it's amazing if the refunds that they can get their clients compared to another shop like H&R Block or these kind of more legitimate tax return preparers. So you usually see this with more of the mom and pop type shops. And what it is they will bring their clients in and they will add information to the return to increase income, or add false information to return to decrease income. And what they're doing again is maximizing that perfect amount of income mixed with children and dependents to maximize the refund for their clients. So they basically falsify returns and maximize the refund for their client. And then what they do is they want to take a percentage of the return, or they'll charge a lot more to prepare the return. So if you see that, that's a red flag, and it's very tempting because as the person, especially with younger people who don't understand that much about the tax system, you're not, and many times they're not even thinking that this doesn't seem legitimate, right? That the person might just ask questions like, maybe we have a college student who also works at a restaurant and he receives wages and he just needs to get his tax returns prepared. So goes to a place, and this person might say, well, you know, on the side, do you ever do any other work on the side? And they might say, I don't know, you know, I help do some painting or things. Oh, well, we can call that a business and we'll put that on the return. And you probably had to drive there, right, to get there. We could deduct your mileage. And they'll start asking these kind of questions and putting these false things on the return. If you ever go to one of those places and you had been to an H&R Block and you were going to get, you know, $500 back, and at this place they can get you $3,500 back, that doesn't seem right. And then if they want to take a percentage of that return, or they're going to charge you $500 where an H&R Block or someone's going to charge you $50, that is signs that this probably is not correct. And the problem this causes is that if you file those returns for a couple years and then later down the road we identify that return preparer was preparing fraudulent returns, you're going to end up owing that money back, and you're going to owe interest and penalties on that money, and it becomes a big headache where you're then dealing with IRS agents to resolve that. So another fraud that's very will be coming up here in a few months as tax returns starting to get filed that we see every year to be aware of. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much, George. That's great information. Yeah, especially with tax season coming right up. I mean, it's almost already 2021. So with tax season almost coming up, that's really useful information and ways of looking out for different types of tax-related fraud. And we have heard quite a bit of that this year. Our next scams that we're talking about is going to be Eric talking about COVID-related scams. And Eric, take it away.
Thanks, Mark. You know, the theme that we've seen already in a lot of these scams is that anytime there are, there's two angles for scammers to make money, right? Either that's to prey on your feelings and to hit you when you're down or when they think you're down to try and get your money and play to your feelings, or they capitalize on new government programs that might be out there and they fraudulently apply for those benefits or offer those benefits to you directly. But either way, there's two different angles to it. And unfortunately, the coronavirus scam has brought upon both angles of all kinds of new trends. And they're basically new takes on old trends framed around a lot of issues surrounding the coronavirus. So let me tell you about a couple of the main ones we've seen. So the first is stimulus scams related to the stimulus checks that came out earlier this spring. You'll see a lot of people that were offering expedited payment because, as we all know, many of us were hurting and could use that extra money, and scammers know that, and that's their opportunity to play to your feelings and play to your wallet to try and make their opportunity to take your funds. So what they'll offer is expedited processing. We can get you your refund before your neighbor or in a day or two, or give you an advance on it if you just pay a small fee. And if you do that, unfortunately, it's just like many of the other scams. Once you've paid the fee and given them your contact information, they're going to continue coming after you and asking for more and more money. And you're never going to actually see the government check that you were offered. Unfortunately, in a situation like this, we just have to be patient and wait for the government to send the money as expected, because if you're offering a prepayment or advance payment, it just simply doesn't work like that. So it's relevant now because there's certainly talk in Congress right now, right, about potentially offering new stimulus checks, right? So although we haven't seen anything official yet, and that's a key point, there's nothing out there yet, scammers are certainly going to be capitalizing on that right now. All it takes is a bill to pass one part of Congress where there would be a little bit of media to back their claim up, or even just the talk of the possibility, and they'll offer it to you and make it seem like it's a certified passed law that yes, there's going to be a second stimulus check, and yes, we can get it to you quickly. I'm sure they're already out there trying that scam right now. So that's a big red flag because it hasn't happened for that second check yet, and so we should not get sucked into this. So that's one big one with the stimulus scams, and just to watch out for them. Shifting to another government offer program that we've seen a little bit is I'll talk about unemployment scams first, and that talks about where people are offered jobs to help through these tough times, right? Again, playing on your heartstrings and playing on your need for extra cash as we all struggle through these times. They will offer guaranteed jobs, high-paying jobs where you can work from home or do little to no work, and on-the-spot job offers with no interview. It just doesn't seem like that would be possible in today's day and age. But they try to offer things like, oh, it might be over Zoom or something, right? Well, since we all do interviews now and everything's done like these webinars remotely, it may seem plausible to you that, oh, that's plausible. They didn't want to call me in for an interview because they didn't want to expose me to the virus, right? Well, you need to be very careful with these offers because you definitely should check the business with the Better Business Bureau. Do a quick Google search to see if they're legitimate, see what their company reviews are, see if it's actually a company that actually exists other than just a fake storefront. So if they offer too good to be true job offers that, again, offer high wages with little work or working from home, be very careful before you provide your personal information, because if you give them their name, your date of birth, your social security number, your mailing address, that's all information that they can use to then perpetrate many of these other scams that we've talked about today, and once they've got your contact info. So be wary of those. The other scam we'll talk about is filing for unemployment. So again, part of the CARES Act that was passed last spring in the big stimulus bill from the government was to offer extra unemployment benefits to those in need. Again, scammers capitalize on that. The most primary way that we've seen is that they're stealing identities, and as they obtain your stolen identity and many of the other ways discussed today, they will then use that to apply for unemployment benefits in different states across the country in those stolen IDs. And that generates often a lot of mail being sent to certain addresses as these scammers want to collect up these unemployment benefits. Typically, most states have been doing unemployment benefits issued via a debit card type situation. So they'll send those in the mail to the user, and often what we'll see is we'll have carriers reporting that there may be dozens or hundreds of these cards being sent to a particular address. If you receive a debit card from an unemployment entity, and maybe it's in a different name, and you didn't apply for that, but it came to your address, that's a red flag that it may be a scam. It may not mean that your information was compromised, but someone else was, and they just sent it to your address. There's a number of different reasons that scammers would do that, to send it to someone else's address. But again, it's a red flag. Contact the postal inspectors, report that, and just be wary of those opportunities. It's also a good reminder to have some identity theft monitoring software set up on your own personal information, just in case yours is stolen and used in one of these situations. Next slide, thank you. Another big one that we're going to continue to see as the pandemic wears on is contact tracing scams. So unfortunately, we are going through this process where we have to identify, right? The government would like to identify how people were infected in the patterns so they can warn others and help try and keep the virus tamped down as much as possible. What scammers are realizing is that if they contact someone and claim to be a contact tracer, they'll ask you for your personal information so that they can track back your activities, which is reasonable. And there are legitimate medical entities that may be reaching out to you to make phone calls to do contact tracing. The difference is the scammers are going to ask for your social security number or bank account info, or ask you to do something to somehow provide payment to them or payment to an entity to expedite the processing or go the extra mile to look into a little bit deeper contact trace or what have you. Those are red flags to watch out for, because you'll never have to pay anyone for contact tracing, especially if you aren't put in a situation where you expect to be offering that. That's another red flag. So just be wary of anyone reaching out saying that they need your financial info to do contact tracing. That should not happen. Another scam that we've seen during coronavirus is provider scams. This is kind of a take on the old scam that we saw and still see with fraudulent calls coming claiming that your grandson or your relative is locked in a jail somewhere in another country, and you need to pay their bail immediately to release them. Well, the new take is they'll have someone call claiming to be a doctor or a representative from a hospital billing department, claiming that your relative was treated for COVID and has amassed huge medical bills, and you need to pay a certain amount to be able to either release them from the hospital or to provide extra care they need to potentially save their life, or any variation of those types of things. And again, that's a big red flag. Hopefully you're in a situation where you're able to perhaps contact other relatives to verify that before you would ever have to be put in that situation. But again, ask yourself, why would they be calling you to pay for fees relative to this person's illness if you're not their power of attorney or set up in that family situation where that would reasonably come to you? So unfortunately, those are the types of things we see where people just play on your heartstrings, and they play on, our need to want to help our family through this time. But just be wary that if you get a call from someone like that seeking those hospital fees. And the last one I'll touch on is PPE scams, protective equipment. I mentioned those earlier. So, there was certainly a big rush on everyone needing masks and gloves and cleaning equipment right earlier this spring. But as the virus shifts and trends shift across the country, and there's spikes and wanes with the virus, sometimes we see spikes where people are asking for more and more personal protective equipment, right? We're still not always confident that we're going to be able to have everything we need for the next spike, right? So unfortunately, there was a lot of companies that came up and offered this equipment for you, and it was set up via a fake website or a fake link on social media, or perhaps they even had somewhat of a storefront, but it might just be a small little office in a strip mall, and there's never enough storage to actually house all the product they claim they have. So these are tricky for everyone to be aware of, but the best thing you can do is just check out Better Business Bureau, do that Google search, and see how long has this company been in business. If they just started up in the last couple months, ask yourselves, did they really establish the network to be able to get pallets and pallets of PPE from foreign countries over here to you on an expedited basis? It's unlikely. So just be very careful on who you give your information to, and especially your payment information and your personal information when it comes to getting this type of equipment. So those are just some of the scams that we're seeing related to coronavirus. If you visit our website at uspis.gov, we have many more to be wary of. And we also do some great prevention videos on YouTube, on our YouTube account. So check those out and make sure you're aware of all the different angles that could be coming your way surrounding this virus. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's great information, and it's just proof positive that scammers really do follow the news, and they follow the trends that are going on. And I'll tell you, those unemployment scams that Eric was just talking about, we had about 20 of them reported to our helpline yesterday alone. So these things are really happening. There are things to know about. So thank you so much, Eric, for that really great information. Just a reminder to everyone out there who has questions, we're going to be handling questions at the end. And so please, as you get a question, I've already heard that we've had some great questions coming in. Please insert them into the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end. Next up, we're going to have Rebecca talking about Ponzi and pyramid related schemes. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Great, thank you. So Ponzi and pyramid schemes have been around for years and years, and what's old is new again. We have seen a significant increase in the past year in these private offerings, and I'm going to walk through a little bit about what they are and what they look like, and then how you can prevent yourself from falling victim to these. Whether you have $50 to invest up to $500,000 to invest, we have seen them across the gamut. And recently we have seen victims in college, including the Air Force Academy. We just brought a case this past couple weeks ago against a Ponzi schemer who was targeting victims in college. And we have brought cases against those who have been targeting seniors. So these cover all generations, and everyone can be victim of these types of scams. So generally, a pyramid scheme is a scheme in which you are recruited and you are paid commissions or credits by recruiting others in your network. Additionally, Ponzi schemes are those when you take investor money and you pay other investors returns using investor money rather than actually having a legitimate business. We call this robbing Peter to pay Paul. This happens time in and time out, and a couple of the key characteristics of these two types of schemes, which are often seen together, are one, they are unregistered, meaning they are not actually registered either with the SEC or a state securities division such as the Colorado Division of Securities. These are private offerings, so they are not Apple on the New York Stock Exchange. This is not something that you would walk into your broker at Charles Schwab or Fidelity and buy. These are private offerings, typically by unregistered people. And the key to surviving is that they recruit friends and family. And we're going to show you in the next slide how they work and then why they always fail. Next slide, please. So let's walk through the anatomy of a scam. And I'm going to use a personal example after I walk through this. But the first thing that often happens is that these type of scam artists infiltrate a group or a community and want to be part of that group because they know playing the long game works. These are not crooks who want a little bit of money. They want your life savings. So they will infiltrate a group, whether it's the military, whether it's my tennis club, whether it's your book club, whether it's your church. And this is what's called affinity fraud. This is when you have an affiliation or a relationship with someone and they target a specific group. The second element is that they often pretend to be part of that group and will be patient. These are patient criminals who are not smash and grab, steal your TV. These are people who have a long game and want, again, to get your significant retirement assets or savings. They exploit that trust, and then ultimately they make you feel like you shouldn't report because you're part of their group, they're part of your friendship. So let me walk you through an example. I prosecuted an individual named Robert Ray White Samples. He had two middle names, so he thought he was a little bit more special than everyone else. So Robert Ray White Samples lived in Parker, Colorado, and he infiltrated a local church. And he went to church every Sunday and he prayed with his fellow congregation members for years. Now, he seemed to hold himself out to be a financial investment advisor and that he could help individuals save money for things that matter to them, retirement, their golden years, college, for their kids. And one by one, he got the parishioners to invest with him in something he called Pot of Gold. That was the name of the entity, Pot of Gold. Now, yes, that should have been a red flag, but it also sounded really good. Who wouldn't want pot of gold? So the parishioners, one after another, started to invest. And ultimately, it was a Ponzi scheme where he was just taking certain congregation members and paying their dollars out to others. People thought they were getting guaranteed returns. They were getting this set, legitimate income stream. They had no idea that it was a fraud. Well, after he infiltrated that group, that affinity group, he even got the pastor to invest. So everyone thought that what was happening was legitimate. When I asked Robert Ray White Samples under oath why he took the money, he said to me, well, I was building $1 million home and I needed to pay my contractor. He did not care one lick that he had infiltrated a house of God and had preyed on the well-being and the people who he prayed with day in and day out. When I asked the parishioners, why did you invest with this man? Every single one told me something similar to, well, he was a good Christian. He prayed with me. I knew his family. He would never defraud me. Turns out he stole all of their money. These happen across our communities day in and day out. Next slide, please. So what do they do that works? They prey on your trust and they recruit others. But pyramids always collapse because at some point there are no more investors to recruit. Here is a key fact. Friends and family, that is 70% of the way that people who are investment fraud victims are recruited. 70% are recruited by friends and family. I trust my mom. If my mom had been invested with this guy, I probably would have been interested in hearing his pitch. If my tennis partner had said to me, I have this great investment opportunity, it's paying 10% returns every month, it's amazing, I would trust my friend, and that trust then is used as a weapon because it has infiltrated your friend group. So one thing you're going to hear me say at least twice today is that faith and friendship should never enter your financial decisions. What's good for your family members, your extended family, your friends may not be what's right for you. Independently verify that the registration status of whatever it is you're investing in, whether it's a $50 opportunity that others are invested in at your college dorm, or whether it's something that you hear from your friends in the community center or at book club, independently verify that those individuals offering the investment are registered with the SEC, and we're going to show you how to do that later today. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was a great example. And now let's listen to what Scott has to say about timeshare scams.
Thanks, Mark. Timeshare frauds have been occurring over the last several years throughout the United States. Right now, we're seeing an uptick in those scams originating from Mexico. There's organized criminal groups operating in Mexico that have obtained lists of U.S. timeshare owners that have timeshares in Mexico. Once those organized groups obtain those lists, what they're doing is they're reaching out to the U.S. timeshare owners and offering to buy those timeshares. And they're offering to make that purchase at a reasonable price, sometimes a little bit above market value. And we see the U.S. victims wanting to sell their timeshare, starting to communicate with this organized criminal group out of Mexico, and they agree to sell their timeshares. The group then produces a contract that they provide, usually via email, to the timeshare owner. The contract looks very official. The contracts that we've seen don't have typos like normal scams will have. They look very official. They've been reviewed by attorneys, so they look to be legitimate. The individual then enters into the contract, and after entering in the contract, the timeshare owner is told that they need to pay a fee, usually a foreign exchange fee, a tax that has to be paid. They're promised that this fee would be held in escrow until the timeshare actually the sale closes. As soon as they pay the first fee, they're asked to pay another fee, and this just continues on. We've seen victims trying to sell a $200,000 timeshare lose as much as $1 million in fees because they continually pay a little bit more and a little bit more every time. Once the victim determines that this is a fraud, they've been victimized, and they stop communicating, we see a period of time lapse, usually a couple of months, and then the victim is recontacted. It actually is a recontact from the same organization, but this time the organization is posing as law enforcement in Mexico, and that law enforcement posing, they claim to have recovered the funds of the victim. They know exactly how much money the victim had provided. They claim they've recovered this money, they have it in a bank account. But of course, before the victim can get their money back, they have to pay a processing fee. And again, the victim, wanting to believe that this is true, that they're actually talking to law enforcement, will pay a fee to this Mexican organization again, thereby being re-victimized. So the important things to think about and be aware of and to share with your friends and relatives, your business associates, that individuals that are offering to buy timeshares, you don't need to pay a fee up front to sell your timeshare. Much like a lot of the scams we've talked about today, there is not a need to pay an upfront fee for trying to sell something. If you want to sell your timeshare, you should be reaching out to your timeshare company or management company to find legitimate buyers for those timeshares. And when you get a contract and you're entering into a contract, it's a good idea to have an independent third party, a lawyer, to review that contract for you, before you actually enter into it. And definitely don't send money if you're trying to sell a timeshare. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, Scott. Great information about timeshare scams. I'll tell you what, when we have reports of timeshare scams, it is one of my least favorite scams to deal with or let people know about, because it is as bad as Scott really described it, and can be very, very tricky. So thanks for that great information, Scott. Up there on the list of my least favorite scams are also romance scams, and George is going to share a little bit more about these romance scams.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So another type of scam that we've seen very often, and I've actually worked a couple of these cases and feel bad for the victims, are these romance scams. And what those are is that, again, these scammers are always looking for a different vulnerability that they can get into, whether it's kind of greed with the lottery scams. And this romance scam, they're using love, right, which is something that we all want. And depending on where you are in your life, I see that sometimes people are more vulnerable to this than others. If maybe you were recently divorced or you've gone through some sort of traumatic event in your life, you can be kind of more vulnerable to this romance scam. And what this is you'll meet someone new, maybe through a chat room or some online chat board or email, and they, like Rebecca said, will play the long game for a little bit, and they'll start emailing back and forth. They may send pictures, and you start to build a relationship with this person that you think could lead to some romance in the future, but is actually a scam. And so eventually, after they've kind of built a rapport with the victim, then they will eventually kind of go two ways with this scam. One, they just directly want to try to get money. And so they'll start asking for help because they have some sort of issue going on. Oftentimes they say that they're working out of the country or they're in another part of the country and they would love to come see you and meet you, but they don't have money for a plane ticket, or they have a lot of money that's tied up in some sort of inheritance. These are all kinds of the words that they'll use, and they just need a little bit of help to float for a little bit of time. And what we see is victims, eager to build this relationship, and they already have an online relationship, will start sending small amounts of money to this person, and it will just ramp up. And oftentimes when we go and talk to these victims, they are so convinced that they're in love with this person that even when we tell them, look, this is a scam, you need to stop sending money to this person, we'll see then a month later that they've sent more money to the same person. So these things can be very powerful. The place that we're even more interested as the IRS and why we get involved in these investigations is they can also be using this scam as a way to move illegal funds from a different fraud or scam. And so recently, right, I talked to you about those identity theft where they file lots of different tax returns for different people and try to get a few $1,000s per return. So what they use these romance scams for is to actually get those funds to the fraudster. Obviously, the IRS has a number of tools where we try to limit this from happening. So, for example, there's a limit to 2 or 3 Treasury refund checks that can be deposited into a single bank account, or there's a limit to the amount of refunds that can go onto a prepaid Green Dot card. And so what these fraudsters do is they know they have to find a way to get this money out. If they filed 100 false tax returns, they need to get all of those 100 refunds. So they'll use these romance scams and they'll ask the victim, hey, I've got these funds coming in that are in someone else's name. Will you just take this check, this treasury check, and deposit into the bank account? And then you send me most of the money and you keep $100. And so they'll use this scam, and the person is actually just helping them to move this money, or what we would call a money mule, which I believe Scott will talk a little bit more in detail soon. So we get involved in these scams because we'll identify an identity theft refund scheme, and then when we look how the money's being going out, there's these different individuals who are depositing 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different treasury checks into accounts and opening bank accounts, putting checks in and transferring the money out. And usually this money is going out of the country and overseas. And so when we go and talk to these people, we say, hey, why are you doing this? This doesn't seem right. Well, yeah, it doesn't seem right, but I've talked to this person for a year, and it even gets to the point sometimes where the fraudsters will start sending the people false IDs. So it has the victim's picture on it, but a different name so that it matches the treasury check and they can go and deposit it. So all those things are red flags that this is just not right. But we still have a lot of victims that fall victim to this. And it's sad because on top of just the financial, they have what they think is kind of an invested relationship, and they obviously are kind of heartbroken to learn that that is a scam. So definitely something to be aware of, especially if you have someone close to you in your life who's kind of gone through a life event that could lead them kind of, victim to this. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, George. Great information. And again, Eric talked about COVID-related scams earlier in the presentation, but this is one that really could be classified as a COVID-related scam as well, even though it's happening during COVID or not, because it really revolves around attention, companionship, those things that everyone wants. And you don't have to be on Match.com to get involved in a romance scam. You can just be passively on social media and be contacted by someone who you don't know. So great information from George. One scam that also goes along with this that we've really seen an uptick in are puppy scams. And also because of coronavirus and people staying at home, people want that companionship. So be really, really cautious about offers for deals on puppies. I really recommend getting to see the puppy before you actually try to purchase it, because we are seeing those scams uptick, and it doesn't have to be a puppy. I've definitely seen kitty scams and heard about kitty scams as well as even bird scams. And personally, I don't like the idea of a bird as a pet, but I'll tell you what, some people want that companionship of the bird. And so all types of pet scams, see the bird, see the kitty, see the dog first before sending money or giving the person money for it. Next up, Scott's going to tell us a little bit more about business email compromise scams.
Thanks, Mark. Business email compromise scams, we refer to as a business email account compromise, but it actually affects not only businesses, but also individuals. It's a very sophisticated scam that usually starts with criminals getting access to an email account. There's usually a computer intrusion that takes place. Once that computer intrusion takes place, usually by sending some malware through an email, someone clicking on a link or opening up a file, their email account gets compromised. After that account is compromised, the criminals then start reading communications that are taking place using that email account. They then identify email communications that are talking about the transfer of funds. They're talking about a wire transfer that's planned to be sent in the future. The criminals then will either use the email account that they've compromised, or they will set up an email account that looks very similar to the compromised email account. And I'll give you kind of an example of that. So if someone was to compromise my email account and they were to use the email account scottsjones@fbi.gov, rather than actually using my email account to commit this transaction, to commit this fraud, they would set up an email account that looks very similar. So they would register a domain instead of being fbi.gov, they would register a domain of maybe fbi1.gov. So someone that's communicating with me may not realize that instead of scott.shones@fbi.gov, they're communicating with scott.shones@fbi1.gov. They wouldn't see that necessarily in the email. So the criminals then, using this spoofed email account, start taking on the communications, and they're talking to the victim, and they're continuing the conversations about business transactions that are taking place. Oftentimes we see it in regards to an invoice that needs to be paid. We'll see it in regards to maybe a change in your payroll account information. You think you're communicating with your payroll department. It's also very frequent in regards to real estate transactions. Individuals that are trying to buy homes are communicating with their title company. And throughout those email communications, they're talking about wiring funds for the closing of that transaction. So the criminals take over those communications, and when it gets time for that actual transaction, that wire to be sent, the criminals change the wiring instructions, and they change it to an account, a bank account that's either under their control or under the control of someone that they're working with, a money mule. George had talked about a money mule in regards to the romance scams. And I'm going to talk about money mules a little bit later on after the break. But they would send it to either an account they are under control of or someone that they're working with is in control of. Once those funds are sent, so someone's going on and they're trying to buy a house, they think they're sending the money to the title company. Instead, they actually send it to an account that's under the control of the criminal. Once those funds are sent, those funds are quickly removed from that account. We'll see that take place day of transaction or within 72 hours, that money is taken out of that account. It's moved to another account, or it's converted to a different type of currency at that point in time, and the money's gone. So the key things to look for in regards to business email compromise is be aware of who you're communicating with on your emails. Make sure you're looking at that email address and make sure you're aware that that's actually the person that you've been communicating with and that email address hasn't changed. Another good thing to do is make a phone call before you send any money. And don't make a phone call to the phone number that's on that email communication, because the criminals will change the phone number on there, and you'll make that phone call and you'll actually be talking to the criminal rather than the person that you should be talking to. So independently verify that phone number and make a phone call and make sure that you're sending those wire transactions to where you need to be. The other thing that you need to do is, if you happen to fall victim to one of these types of scams, is contact your bank immediately. Banks have security departments where they're aware of this type of fraudulent activity, and they are very good at trying to recover those wires and to recall those wires, but they need to be notified immediately. So as soon as you are aware that you've been a victim of this type of scam, contact your bank. The next thing you should do is immediately file a report with the Internet Crime Complaint Center. That address is ic3.gov. I is in internet, C is in complaint, the number 3.gov. By filing a complaint with ic3.gov, it will allow the FBI to get involved, and we can start working with our partners here locally in the United States, as well as international partners, to try to freeze and recover those funds. And we are successful in getting those funds recovered if we are able to be notified early. So those are the two things that need to be done. Contact your financial institution, and then after you contact your financial institution, file a complaint with IC3. And that complaint with IC3 can be filed any time of the day, 24/7. There's someone looking at those complaints that come in. The next slide, please. The business email compromises continue to occur, and the reason they're continuing to occur is how successful they are. When we look about other type of activities that are out there, not many of these frauds or other criminal activity is going to bring on average $159,000. And that's what most people are getting when they are doing this type of fraud. And a lot of these funds are sent overseas quickly, which makes it much more difficult for us to track. So that's why these continue to be a scam that we're seeing ongoing. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks so much, Scott. Great information and really important information, because these ones, man, these scams, they really do add up when we hear about them. So I'm sure that some of you have heard about some of these scams happening in the news. Melissa, if you'd please go to slide 27, that would be wonderful. So I just want to talk about a couple of other trending scams that we haven't necessarily covered yet. Tech support scams still remain one of the most common scams that we're hearing about through the Elder Watch helpline. I'll say that it always is a top 3 scam. When we did a survey a couple of years ago, it was actually the most common scam that Coloradoans 50 plus had said they had been approached by. And if you're not familiar with the tech support scam, it essentially happens when you receive an unsolicited phone call or a pop-up window appears on your screen saying they're with a computer company that's reputable, something like Microsoft or Apple or Dell or Hewlett-Packard, and they're going to help you with a problem that's infected your computer. So be really, really cautious about any type of unsolicited contact from someone saying they're with a computer company, especially Windows. And right now, they're also using the Amazon name, and that kind of goes to the next one on the list. Amazon imposter scams have really bubbled up. And I'll say that, you know, every day we're hearing more and more of them and different type of tactics. And one of the tactics that the scammers are using is using that tech support angle. So if you receive an unsolicited phone call from Amazon saying that, you know, there's a problem with your account and that they need your login and password to take care of it, just know that Amazon, like those other government imposters that have been talked about earlier, is not going to call you. Know what your correspondence looks like from Amazon, and know that scammers are using that Amazon name to try and get your money. And not just the shopping kind of money either, the actual money. And they want lots of it too. Also, a trending scam that we're seeing right now, government grant scams. And these happen in a really tricky fashion. Most of the times it's someone who's being contacted through social media. And what scammers do is they mimic or hijack the profile of someone who you know on social media, and then you will receive contact from them saying that they had received some type of government funds. And they might say, oh, I got $70,000 from the Be a Good Person fund. That's some type of government entity. All I had to do was pay a registration fee of $1,000, and here's the link to go to, or here's the phone number to call. So it's really important to remember that if you receive a contact like this, to ignore it. To also let your friend whose likeness is being used on Facebook or whatever social media entity know that their likeness is being used, and they're likely contacting their entire friends list. So be really, really cautious of these, and know that any type of offer like this is too good to be true. We've talked a little bit today about grandparent emergency scams, and I just wanted to go over it one more time because it is a scam that just doesn't go away. Essentially what happens is a grandparent or other family member receives a phone call saying that their family member is in trouble, they've been in an accident, or they're in the hospital, or whatever it may be, and they want and they need money to be wired to them or sent via gift card to help alleviate the problem. So be really careful about an emergency phone call claiming to be with someone, a family member or a close friend that is trying to get your money. Be really, really cautious of those. They're still coming, and it doesn't have to be a grandparent-grandchild relationship. It can be any type of relationship. Some of the best ones I have seen have been with spouses or nieces and nephews as well. Also right now, it's obviously the holiday season. Lots of different types of scams around retail shipping, phishing texts, and emails. We talked a little bit about this earlier with regards to phishing, but I would say be really cautious about any correspondence that's coming out about packages that are coming to your house via text messages or email, claiming to be with UPS or the Postal Service or whatever it may be, because scammers are using these tactics right now, and it is a dangerous and they are very, very good, again, phishing attempts. Also, charity scams still exist, unfortunately. I'll say that, do your research, just like has been suggested earlier. Do your research with regard to charity, what charities you're giving to make sure that your hard-earned money is going to the right places, because there still are those bad actors out there who are trying to pose as different types of charities and get your money. So I wanted to bring these up because a lot of them are kind of topical given the time of year that we're at, because they are what we classify as holiday scams as well, but just some ones that we have not covered yet. And I think we had a little bit of internet problems with Rebecca, but I'd like Rebecca to chime in real quick. And are you there, Rebecca?
I sure am.
Wonderful. And she's going to just cover our last trending fraud or scam on digital currency. Take it away, Rebecca.
Thanks so much for pivoting with me in our internet world. So I want to talk just briefly about digital currency and then the scam that we're seeing with something called initial coin offerings, or ICOs. So let's just back it up and just get understanding as to what exactly digital currency is. So let's start with the blockchain. We've all heard of the blockchain. The blockchain is just an electronic distributed ledger that uses cryptography to process and verify transactions. These transactions are then stored and maintained indefinitely along the ledger, and they are open, meaning that they are not stored in any specific spot, but are available for everyone who is on the chain to see. Now, blockchain is an amazing technology, and it has a lot of different applications, and one of those applications is cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency, or digital currency, is just a digital representation of value that can be traded, stored, or exchanged on the blockchain. The blockchain then can replace fiat currency, meaning currency that is US dollars or currency backed by the government. Additionally, the primary examples of cryptocurrency include Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and others like Kraken. We are seeing an increase in frauds targeting the initial coin offering space. So there's another layer. So we're not just talking about buying Bitcoin, which is volatile in and of itself. We are seeing frauds that are called ICO frauds. Now, these are tokens on the blockchain that purport to be something like Bitcoin, but in fact, they offer a utility, a value, something that you can get in exchange for buying that token. They often have a professional looking website, and like we've seen here today, they are often spoofed and made up with con artists on the backside who really just want to take your money. So let's go to the next slide. So here's an example of a fake ICO, something that looks legitimate but isn't. And you can feel free to go check out this particular token called howiecoins.com. Now, Howie coins are an ICO, and you will see that it looks official. It looks amazing. It's got this fantastic picture of an island where we all wish we were today on this cold, snowy day. And it looks very fancy. But here's what you're seeing. You can, if you invest today, you can get a 15% bonus, and there's a time limit. If you don't click quickly, you are going to miss out. So if we look at the next slide, we are going to see some of the representations that this initial coin offering has. Number one, it is a way to, according to them, create a travel-focused token that you can exchange for luxury travel, airlines, car rentals, hotels. This has a lot of upside, right? It sounds great. How could I find one token where not only can I get a return, I get to use it for travel? This sounds great. It has certain appeals to it. One, it claims to be registered with the US government, and it claims to be trading on an SEC compliant exchange. This sounds wonderful. One of the cool things is it's also, you can trade it for other cryptocurrencies or cash, and you can get all your points on your travel. Well, who wouldn't want to invest in this? If you go to the next page, here is another example of why we should all invest in this particular ICO. You can actually get a 25% discount if you invest by June, and you get the gold level status. Check out that beach. Who doesn't want to be on that beach? Well, if you go to the next slide, what you'll see is some of the concerns. This is actually a spoofed website. This is not real. What they offer are similar to the other scams that we're seeing, and that is claims of high returns and guaranteed returns, and they often have celebrity endorsements. Cyber scams and ICOs are one of the top complaints that we see at the SEC, and it's because they sound new, exciting. They are taking advantage of kind of an unknown world of digital currency, and they often claim to be SEC or government compliant. First off, the government does not endorse any digital currency ever. This is similar to having an imposter scam saying that you're SEC compliant. That does not happen. One of the red flags that we're seeing with ICOs is investing with a credit card. That in and of itself is a red flag. No investment can be made with a credit card. If somebody's asking for a credit card, that is a red flag and you need to stop. Some of the other concerns about investing in ICOs and digital currency is that once the money is gone, it's gone. You have to have a private wallet and a public wallet in order to actually exchange these tokens. Oftentimes, scammers say, we want you to open up a wallet at, say, for example, a coin exchange like Coinbase, and we'd like you to then transfer to us your legitimate Bitcoin, and we'll give you these fake tokens. Well, we can't control that once the tokens are gone. Once the Bitcoins have been transferred, they are gone. Additionally, oftentimes we have seen amongst my federal law enforcement agents that the scope of these frauds is international. Like romance scams, these individuals could be anywhere around the world, and your Bitcoin could be traded anywhere around the world. And there's no central law enforcement agency that can actually trace these funds. We do not have jurisdiction to go into certain countries and try to find your Bitcoin. So it's a high risk area. And at some point, there are numerous scams that come in, whether on the entry or on the exit, of trying to get in and out of these scams. We actually have specific investor alerts related to digital currency scams because these are trending and these are becoming a hot item amongst all generations. So please feel free to look at investor.gov. And if you want to have a fun laugh with your family, use the howiecoins.com website, because at the end, it will actually warn you that you had just fallen for a fake scam, and it will link you to the SEC's website. So that was our spoof for today. So thanks for letting me share a little bit about ICOs, Mark.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for sharing. And I'll say that that picture of the beach makes me want to be there. So I think that also could be one of those scams that I might be vulnerable to, looking out my window versus looking at that photo of the beach. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break and be back at 10:45. So we look forward to seeing you in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you got a chance to fill up your tea. I filled up my tea and we're ready to go. Rebecca is going to kick us off with talking about some persuasion tactics.
Thanks, Mark. So one of the things we absolutely wanted to cover today is the common tactics amongst all the frauds that we've just heard to help you become an empowered consumer and investor and recognize the tactics that fraudsters use to steal your hard-earned money. So these are the 5 most commonly used persuasion tactics. And don't worry, we're going to go through each one individually so that you can practice feeling it and spotting it. These 5 were developed based on a review by academic researchers, both with AARP, FINRA Foundation, and Washington University, which were able to listen to actual undercover fraud tapes. And they identified the persuasion tactics that the fraudsters used that seemed to work to get you to hand over your hard-earned dollars. So when they identified these, something else interesting that they learned was that in frauds, typically there are at least twice as many persuasion tactics used to try to get you to hand over your dollars. And so you need to know and recognize that when a fraudster is using these persuasion tactics against you, they are going to barrage you with emotional ether to try to get you to make a irrational decision. We're going to teach you these tactics and then teach you how to step back and avoid the fraud. So let's start with phantom riches on the next slide. Mark, why don't you explain phantom riches?
So phantom riches is really convincing, and Rebecca already just used it by dangling that image of the beach in front of us. It's very, very frustrating, but thinking about it, you know, dangling the prospect of wealth, guarantees, or great returns can be a really, really enticing thing. And Eric talked about scams earlier involving sweepstakes, prizes, and lotteries, and I'll say that this is one of the reasons why those scams work. And I'll say that oftentimes when we hear about the scams, they say that they are coming from Publishers Clearinghouse and they're going to get a couple $1 million and then a car. And when they say what car they're going to get, it's never a jalopy. It's never I'll pick on myself. It's never my first car, an '82 Camry. It is always a brand new Mercedes-Benz. And so again, they're putting those images in your mind of phantom riches, which is really, really critical and a really great tactic that all of us can see how we might be sucked in by it. What's next, Rebecca?
Source credibility is on the next slide, Mark. And source credibility is easily faked. It's always great to deal with people who are credible. Why did Mark introduce us and explain our titles and how long we've been at the agency today? Because if I had shown up in my yoga pants, which I may actually be in my yoga pants, you wouldn't have believed anything I had to say if he didn't say she's from the SEC, been doing this for 20 years. If you look at our fellow panelists, they have their official seals in the background. It gives them instant credibility. Well, again, credibility can be faked, and we see this time in and time out with fraudsters who infiltrate a group and fake who they are. So we are going to show you how to check on that fake credibility. So the next slide is actually a fantastic program called the PAUSE program. It's a public alert for unregistered soliciting entities. This is found on the sec.gov website, and we will share the link with you. But we have been compiling a list of fake broker dealers, fake bank names, fake government names, and you can actually go and check to see before you ever hand over money whether or not the entity that it claims to be on the other side of the phone, claims to be on that email, is it legitimate or is it fake? Let me give you some examples from the PAUSE program. Here are some of the names I just downloaded today. The Department of Interagency Protection Bureau. Sounds pretty fancy, right? What about the Department of Financial Securities Board? These are fake government agencies, and we have them listed for you right on this website. So it gives you the power to ask and check to make sure you're dealing with someone who's not faking their credibility. The second slide here, the next slide, actually also shows another wonderful resource. Professional designations are those certificates that accompany people. So for example, I have a Juris Doctorate. I did go and get my law degree and I've been practicing law, and you can check that. But I also, on my business card, it says Rebecca Franciscus, JD, BWE. Do you guys know what the BWE stands for? Well, I have designated myself the best wife ever. And I actually feel like I've earned that a little bit. So I think it's fine that I put that on my business card, and it only cost me $7 at Kinko's to print those up. Well, we have seen fraudsters day in and day out put fake designations on their business cards and hang up fancy certificates that look legitimate. How can you check as an investor and consumer? The FINRA website has a professional designations checker. And I'm going to just back up here for a second. FINRA stands for the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and they work alongside the SEC to regulate the securities markets. FINRA is a trusted source, and they have the alphabet soup. So when you get a business card from somebody who wants to provide your taxes and help you with your tax returns, to help you with investments, that claims to be a professional that can help you earn money for your retirement, the first thing you're going to do is check to make sure they're at a legitimate organization, and you're going to make sure the designations after their business card are real. For example, if you have a chartered financial analyst, that individual has spent years taking tests and learning. However, if you have somebody that says HSG after their website, that's high school graduate, and they may not be the one that you want managing your money. So you can be an empowered investor to check credibility. What's next, Mark?
So the next one is social consensus. And, if everybody wants it, it must be good. I think, and I'll just say that this is one that you have to be very, very careful with. Rebecca gave us a great example of it earlier with regards to the church situation. If everyone at the church is investing, everyone's doing it at our church, let's do it. If I told you that everyone on Tuesday mornings are sitting in their home with a sport jacket on and also athletic shorts, all the cool kids are doing it, you should too. That is a good example of social consensus. And so be very, very cautious about that. Don't follow the crowd mentality. Rebecca, tell us about reciprocity.
Reciprocity is actually one that is pretty simple to replicate. This is something we've been trained as humans to do. If you are invited to dinner, what's the first thing you think of? Well, I'll either bring an appetizer or bread or a dessert. And when the host tells me they don't need me to bring anything, you better bet my mother has taught me to bring flowers or wine, because that's what good humans do. We have been trained since birth that if you get something for free, it makes you feel uncomfortable. So you have to reciprocate. That's all reciprocity is. But when it's used in a scam, it's used for nefarious purposes. And the key is they're going to give you a small item, a small token, a small benefit, but they expect something big in return. So let me give you an example. How many of you have received an invitation to come to a fancy restaurant and hear an investment pitch? They're going to feed you a free steak for $30, $40. But what they want in return is your $30,000 investment. So the scales are not equal, and that's when it becomes a problem. Reciprocity is used in everyday opportunities. For example, when you walk through King Soopers, a buy one, get one, they're going to give you one. If you buy one, that's reciprocity. And that seems equal, right? A boat, buy one, get one. It seems equal scales. But when you are trying to avoid scammers, watch out when they say, I'm going to give you my own share because I believe in this so much for you, or I'll cut my commission because I care so much about you, or I'll pay part of that advance fee to get those taxes out of Jamaica so that you can get your lottery winnings. That's reciprocity, and that's when it becomes a red flag. What's next, Mark?
Scarcity is our last persuasion tactic that we're going to talk about. And it's if something is rare or scarce, it must be more valuable. And so this is what we hear about when we hear about limited time offers. You have to act now, or else you're not going to have the opportunity to do it. And and scammers are doing that all of the time. We're also hearing it in other marketing tactics. Do you have a really good example of one, Rebecca?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an example where in mostly investment scams where people want you to be enticed to give larger dollar amounts, they use scarcity as a tactic. And this is FOMO, the fear of missing out. Mark, I only have 2 units left and I got another guy on line 1. Are you going to make this investment for your future? Are you going to be able to pay for college for your kids? It's when they use that fast talking, forward leaning barrage that becomes intimidating and concerning. That's when you turn off the emotional, or that's when you turn off the logical part of your brain and are working only on emotion. This is the closer oftentimes. And Mark, we've also seen fear. Explain how fear is sometimes used as scarcity.
Oh, I mean, they're definitely going to, I mean, fear is a tactic that is used by scammers, and it is one of the most successful tactics that's used by scammers. This is going to happen if you don't do this. And so it's really, really imperative that people are watching out for the different, fear tactics that could be used as a result of not taking a part or acting right away onto something. Next slide, please.
That's right. So what is our goal? Our goal here is to ensure that you practice spotting these persuasion tactics, whether they come to your door trying to sell you goods, whether they come into your home with investment opportunities or free lunch seminars, or whether they call you on the phone or from emails. Practice spotting these persuasion tactics, and we ask that you practice spotting them in everyday consumer activities. These work whether or not you are going to the King Soopers to buy your groceries or whether you're going to buy a car. That limited time offer, that offer of doing you a favor, the social consensus that everybody's doing the same thing, and being sold by someone who appears credible to get you what it is you're hoping for, that dream vacation or paying for college. These tactics are exactly what are used by fraudsters, and studies have shown that if you can practice spotting these persuasion tactics, not only will you be a better consumer, but you will be a trained fraud fighter who can avoid falling victim to all of the scams that we've talked about today. So by being able to spot those vulnerabilities that we talked about at the beginning, identifying, recognizing the scams, and recognizing the cons that the scammers are using, you will be able to prevent yourself from falling victim to scams. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. And as next time you drive by McDonald's, when you see that sign that says billions and billions served, think, what are they trying to use to get me to go buy a hamburger? And so, you'll see these every day, and Rebecca gave you some great examples. Next slide, please. So scammers are often persuading us to act, and often that action that they're wanting to get us to do is to pay money in some way, shape, or form. Eric, will you tell us some of the ways that scammers are requesting funds right now?
Yes, thanks, Mark. There's a lot of different apps and technology and things that are being created by the day for us to be able to make these type of payments, right? But there's still a lot of other tried and true ways that the scammers continue to use. So we'll start with the most obvious one, and that is they will simply ask for cash to be sent to them, often via the US mail or through another shipper. And that right there should be a huge red flag to you, because in today's day and age, with all of these technological options available, there are many more legitimate, safe ways to send money to anyone, and cash should never be sent through the US mail. I just can't stress that enough. I would never, ever, ever send cash through the US mail, especially with all the options out there today. Unfortunately, postal inspectors do see instances where people will send tens of thousands of dollars in a single package of just straight cash. The reason that scammers like to ask for cash is because, unlike many of the other options available today, cash is not traceable, right? So if you go to the bank and you take out $20,000 and you put it in a box and you mail it to the scammer will have no way of tracing that back to you, and neither does law enforcement have a way of tracing if they use that cash or where they spend that cash. So that's why the scammers like it, because they know that that's the quickest way to get what they seek, and that is cash, right? So that's a huge red flag. And that goes back to what I mentioned earlier, where we encourage you to not rely on the fact that if you do send cash through the mail, that postal inspectors or law enforcement could intercept that and return it to you, because that's very difficult to happen. So if someone's asking you to send cash in the mail, that's red flag number one. Stop right there and really evaluate the accuracy of this request. But the other offers that we see a lot of are gift cards or some of the credit debit cards that you can buy in the stores, where scammers will have you go to the store and buy a large number of these gift cards or credit cards, and they may have you either send them to them, or often what they'll do is just have you call them on the phone and read off the card numbers along with the PIN numbers to them to be able to get the payment that they seek. Again, another red flag. You have to ask yourself critically, why would they not want that in their possession to use at their will, right? So do not do that when scammers call and ask for that information. Please don't offer that to them. Another take is they use these modern applications that we have on our cell phones and online to be able to take this information and offer a transfer, whether that's a peer-to-peer app or a crypto app, where they use these virtual currencies where you can share it through apps. And maybe that's an app such as Venmo or PayPal, or maybe that's an app like the Bitcoin apps out there. So there's two different angles to that, but anytime that someone asks you for your account information, all they really need to make a payment, right, is your Venmo username or your PayPal username. And that's all that they should need to be able to have a payment if it's legitimate. But if they start asking for things like your banking account information that's tied to those accounts, that can be another big red flag. They shouldn't need that if the system works perfectly, right? So anytime you're asked to use an application that you're unfamiliar with, first, it's important to make sure that you're accessing that application from the most proper source, right? If you're asked to download a new application, make sure it's in the Apple Play Store or the Google Play Store to make sure that you can get the official version of an app that looks legitimate, that is verified, that is from a source that you trust. If they're asking you to download an app you've never heard of, or download it from a link or from an email link or any other source, again, another red flag that's likely a phishing attempt or a scam attempt that's going to expose your financial information. Another scam that we'll see is they'll ask you to complete a wire transfer. And that may involve you going into your bank and doing the old-fashioned transfer where you interact with a bank employee to send the money directly to a account, and it's often an overseas account. Sometimes you may be duped into trusting that process because you'll think that by interacting with a bank employee, it somehow makes things feel more comfortable and more official, right? You're talking with Jane, the teller that you've known for years, and you believe that this is your bank where you have your account, and so it seems fine. But again, you're being duped into a situation where you're going to be wiring money to an account and potentially exposing your personal financial information to these scammers. And also, it's the quickest way for them to get the money. Out of all the methods that we've listed, that's the most quick, fast, and efficient way for them to send money, for you to send money to them. So unfortunately, it's also hard to call that back at times if there's fraud along that. Now, certainly postal inspectors and Scott and his FBI team and our partners at the Secret Service, there are mechanisms in place where we can work with banking institutions to rectify those situations. But again, don't rely on that. We want to make sure that you're aware of these things and these triggers to avoid those to start off with. One of the last ways that we'll see people try and access your funds and have payments sent to them for these scams would be through just providing access to your online banking account information. So they may simply ask for that for a number of reasons, and maybe they have you confused, and maybe they're using those fast talking techniques that Rebecca mentioned earlier. And they'll say, hey, don't worry about it. If you just give me your login info, I'll log into your bank and we'll take care of this real quick. And I promise I'll log out when I'm done. But you certainly should not trust them, and certainly never provide anyone your bank account information to make any of these sorts of payments, or any payment for that matter. That's something that you hold on to personally and you should manage on your own. But another way that they can kind of get around that is by offering some of these payment applications where you do have to synchronize your login information with that third-party application in order to complete the payment. PayPal, Venmo, examples like that. But again, if they've sent you to a malicious application or a malicious entity and you're putting your bank account information in there, that is another red flag that they're going to get your information and be able to do whatever they want with it. And unfortunately, if you provide that information in that situation, they can lock you out of your account. They can change your address of where your statements and things are being sent, and they can change a lot of information and essentially take over your bank profile. So please be wary of those types of situations, and just know that whenever you're interacting with a transaction online, make sure you look for the lock icon that you'll see in the address bar of your web browser. It's a good sign that indicates that this website is secure. If they put the lock on the website somewhere or anywhere else, in the web page, they may try and do that to try and trick you. That's not always a guarantee that that website is secure. You should also look for an S after the HTTP, which is the very first part of a web URL, a web address. And so if you see HTTPS, that's a sign that it's a secure website that you can hopefully trust. But if there's anything else beyond HTTPS, other numbers or letters or periods or variations of that, again, another red flag to watch out and not trust that website. So there's many different ways out there, and again, with all the new technology, there are many ways that you can trust to send people money legitimately. But unfortunately, the scammers will use all of those to try and manipulate you and take advantage of what seem to be legitimate sources to try and trick you into using their payment source so that they either get their money quickly or they take over your account and just can take all of your money. So that's a quick summary of some of the most common methods of payments that we see. Thanks, Mark.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. That's a great overview of these many ways that scammers are asking for money. And just a reminder for the audience that this link will be emailed out to all of the attendees or all registrants. So if you do want to review any of these slides, they will be emailed out. Scott, we often hear about situations when victims are asked to transfer funds. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, we see in all of these scams that we're talking about today, the money has to ultimately be moved. And a lot of times the criminal organizations use individuals that we refer to as money mules. A money mule is someone that simply is going to receive funds from one of these frauds, and then they will actually move it on to another bank account, or they will transfer it to a different form. They'll wire transfer it, they'll convert it to a cashier's check. Sometimes they're using a money service business such as Western Union or MoneyGram to move the funds. We're also seeing recently the conversion of the money that's coming into their bank account into virtual currency. So it's further difficult for us to track. Next slide, please. There are two different types of money mules that we see. We see those that are unwitting. They're unaware that they're actually involved in this criminal activity. A lot of times, these money mules that are unwitting are also victims of other scams. Like George talked about earlier, when you're talking about romance scam victims, we often see those romance scam victims after they've lost their own money, then go ahead and accept money from criminal activity and transfer it on, not knowing that they are actually involved in this criminal activity because they believe that they're still in this loving relationship and they're helping out someone that they're in this relationship with. We also see those individuals that are witting, those individuals that are known to be involved in this illegal activity. A lot of times we'll see this with individuals from foreign countries that'll come over in the United States. Most recently, we've seen a group of J1 visa students that came over from India. They worked in the hotel industry. And while they're working in the hotel industry, they're setting up bank accounts here in the United States, and then they're accepting illegal proceeds from the tech fraud scam that Mark had talked about earlier. They get the proceeds in their bank accounts, and then they're sending that proceeds back to their criminal organizations in India. Next slide, please. The goal of a money mule is to convert illegitimate proceeds to make it appear that they're actually clean money so the criminals can use that money. And we'll see that money mules be used in all kinds of criminal activities. Not only the fraud that we've talked about today, but also in regards to drug trafficking and human trafficking. Next slide, please. So money mules can get involved in several different ways. We see a lot of work from home opportunities, especially now in 2020 with a lot of people staying at home, a lot of people looking for job opportunities. They see jobs on the internet, apply for the jobs, get hired, and they don't even realize a lot of times that what they're doing is involved in illegal activity. So if you're getting money into your bank account and you're asked to transfer that money onto another platform, exchange it, transfer it on for a small fee, you need to think twice about that activity that you're involved in, because it's highly probable that you're involved in money mule activity. We also see individuals get involved when they get on dating and social media sites, like we talked about in regards to the romance scam. Next slide, please. When you're a money mule, you can actually be charged with a federal criminal violation as a result of that, because you're actually involved in criminal activity. And these are just some of the things to think about when you are transferring money. It can also affect you personally, not only in regards to federal charges, but you can also actually have your credit affected. A lot of times we see money mules have bank accounts closed down and they're not able to open up more bank accounts. Next slide. So if you actually think that you are involved or someone that you know is involved in this, the first thing to do is stop communicating with the individuals. Don't send the money on, don't transfer money. Sometimes we actually see it, money mules be used for reshipping schemes as well. So if you're receiving a package in the mail and you're asked to repackage it and send it out, stop that type of activity. Maintain all of your receipts, all your communications with those individuals, and then report that information to law enforcement. Next slide. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Scott. Great overview of how money mules work really quickly. I want to go through just really quickly the reporting resources that are available through our agencies and just a couple other quick resources. Again, these slides will be available through CSU, and they will also be sent to you if you want to go back and review. Scott just mentioned reporting to the FBI, ic3.gov, sec.gov as well, USPIS, great resources on their website as well, and then tigta.gov for reporting to the IRS and IRS scams. Next slide, please. Colorado Attorney General's Office, their website for reporting fraud and learning about more frauds and scams is stopfraudcolorado.gov. And to get a hold of the Elder Watch helpline, that's the program I'm with, you can call the Colorado Attorney General's Consumer Complaint Line, and that's the number on the screen. It's 1-800-222-4444. The FTC is obviously one of the main places for reporting all frauds and scams. They also have a fantastic identity theft resource called identitytheft.gov, and you can also report identity theft through their website. Next slide, please. Other identity theft resources that are critically important to know about. Checking your annual credit report is something that people do not do enough. You can do that over the phone or by visiting annualcreditreport.com. When we did a survey of Coloradoans, we found out about 20% of people check their annual credit report each year. That number is too low. Reviewing your annual credit report can catch signs of identity theft, and it's critically important. You can also contact one of the credit reporting bureaus to place a fraud alert or a credit freeze. Learn more about all those things at identitytheft.gov. Next slide, please. Colorado has a really great resource through the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. They have an identity theft hotline. It's just something to know about. If you do experience a really critical identity theft issue, go to the CBI's website and they can help out with identity theft and solving issues related to, especially, I'm not talking about like if someone stole your credit card number, I'm talking about more in-depth identity theft issues. So it's a really nice resource that Colorado has specifically. Next slide, please. So my next question, just real quick on investigation, is for George. George, once we report scams, everyone wants to know, how does your office investigate these scams?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark, and obviously it's going to vary a little bit from agency to agency, but the one thing I want to make sure and point out is that if you were to report, let's say, a fraud to the IRS and it didn't deal with exactly what we want to look at, we'll definitely send it on to FBI or Postal or SEC, so it'll get to the right place as long as you report it somewhere. As far as us, like let's say on a return preparer, one of those bad return preparers who charge too much for returns and do false returns. When we receive those reports, we have analytics teams that will look for a trend and a pattern. If it looks like it's a large scheme, and if it is, then we'll initiate an investigation. And then we use different investigative means, such as undercover operations, where we pose as a client getting a tax return prepared, and we do a lot of interviews with people, and we just build that case to lead to prosecution. And that's most likely what all the agencies do, just within their own kind of little ways.
Excellent. Thanks so much, George. Rebecca, will you just elaborate a little bit about how local, state, and federal agencies are working together and on these investigations?
Absolutely. So like George said, we are an any open door policy at the government. If you complain to any one of us, or if you even start your complaint with Mark's Elder Watch program, then we get those informations, we get those reports, and we share them between each other. And what may not come across in this virtual platform is that all of our law enforcement partners are colleagues. We work together day in and day out, and we are actually friends, and we work together as one government to try to protect you. Each of our jurisdictions and each of our agencies wear a different hat. But again, our goal is the same, to protect our public. And so we have robust reporting techniques between us. We have sharing groups between us. We have working groups between us. But rest assured, we will do our part. And our biggest ask today is that you empower and protect yourselves and help us do our job by reporting. Thanks, Mark.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rebecca. Let's go to some questions from the audience. We want to get as many questions as we can from the audience. Let's go.
Mark, this is Sue.
Thanks,
we have
Sue.
3 questions that are related to the IRS. The first being, is the tax preparer allowed to have a customer tax return deposited into their own bank account prior to distribution to the customer?
George?
Yeah, great. And I saw that question. So there is nothing to stop a tax return preparer from depositing that check into any bank account that they know the number for, or any green dot, or what we call prepaid cards. That's a physical, looks like a credit card that has a 16-digit number. They can put that on there and deposit it onto there. So it's very important when you're choosing a tax preparer, really to have that deposit direct deposited, that refund direct deposited to your own bank account, or have a check mailed to your address if you don't have a bank account, because once that funds goes into that preparer's account, you really have no way of even knowing how much it was. And that's a common scheme. They'll get a $5,000 refund because they put something fraudulent on your return, and they'll give you $2,500 and you never know the difference. Or they'll just steal your money too. So they can do it, and there's nothing to stop them, but you really should look for a preparer that doesn't do business that way.
Okay, thank you. All right, and related to that, if a constituent has received a form from the IRS, they've tried to verify at irs.gov website that's an actual form, how can they actually confirm that the mail they received is really from the IRS? And then part of that is it possible to receive a PIN from the IRS without having been a victim of tax fraud?
Yeah, I saw both those questions as well, and they're both really good questions. So to the individual who received the form from the IRS, and that is how legitimate a conversation would start between the side of IRS that does audits of tax returns and a customer. So I would probably be able to tell just by looking at it, but obviously when you guys see it, it'd be the first time see it. The first of all, it'll usually come certified mail almost always, because they need a record that it was delivered, the auditor. But past that, you can just call the main IRS number, which is the 800-829-1040. And then, you're going to have to wait for a little while, especially right now with COVID. But eventually you'll get to a person who identify themselves and give you a unique identification number. And then you can just explain to them, and they'll be able to look up your account and see if that notice was sent to you. So they'll have a computer record of notices that were sent and can tell you if that was true or not. As far as the PIN, the identity PIN, actually this year will be the first time that you can proactively get one of those identity theft pins. And I don't think it's going to be starting until mid-January. But if you go to irs.gov, so www.irs.gov, and you just go to the search box there and put get IP as in identity protection, so IP PIN, there'll be a whole page there with the links and the process to do that. You're going to have to go through some verification questions and some processes to really verify that it's you, and then they will send you that PIN number to use. And that's a process you'll have to do each year. You'll get a new PIN.
Okay, thank you. Mark, the next question is there a downside to proactively placing a freeze or fraud alert on your credit?
George, do you want to take that, or Scott?
Sure, I can jump in. No, there isn't a downside to placing a freeze on your credit report. It will be a little bit more inconvenience for you if you are going to get new credit. If you're trying to open up a new credit card or something like that, there's a new verification process in place, additional verification, but there isn't a downside to doing it other than that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Rebecca just mentioned that she has a freeze. I would say that, the fraud alert lasts for a year. There's really no downside to that. The freeze might just make it hard if you actually are trying to open a line of credit or, finance a car or buy a house, that type of a thing. You have to remove the freeze before moving forward.
Okay, thank you. For web or telephonic based scams, are you seeing that the perpetrators are typically US or foreign based? And then a second part of that question is, how do we report what we think is foreign based fraud attempts?
Scott, that sounds like your department.
So yeah, web-based scams, it really doesn't matter if it's foreign-based or US-based. A lot of times we see them originating overseas, but they're involving individuals located in the United States. So when you're seeing that type of scam, the important thing is to report it to IC3. Again, when you report any fraudulent activity on the internet to the Internet Crime Complaint Center, it'll get routed to the appropriate authorities to look into it. If that happens to be the FBI, the IRS, Postal, Secret Service, we'll share that information and make sure it gets researched.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, in September, FinCEN, they revealed how big banks are participants in money laundering, Ponzi schemes, etc. How are you all working to ensure that our banking system isn't complicit in undermining US national security?
Rebecca, do you want to chime in on that one?
Absolutely. I'm just going to give some general information about what FinCEN is and how we use it generally, and let you know that sometimes you need to verify the information that you're getting in terms of what's being reported in the news. So let's step back. And FinCEN actually is a part of, it used to be a part of the Department of Treasury, which is George's agency, and George could absolutely just chime in on this as well. But there are certain requirements under the Patriot Act for banks to report suspicious activity to FinCEN. And this is a very widespread, common anti-money laundering process. And this is helpful information to law enforcement, and it is a part of our congressional laws. This is a mandate by Congress that banks, brokerage firms, and others participate in the FinCEN reporting. In terms of whether or not the government is participating in fraud, I will say as a personal matter, I have worked at the SEC and I've worked with law enforcement day in and day out across the country for 20 years. And I do not believe personally that that FinCEN is participating in money laundering. In fact, they don't take custody of any assets. They are just a reporting mechanism. So the fact that they are being alleged to participate in money laundering seems to me to be an anathema. So just make sure that you're asking questions and verifying questions and getting the information from the sources that are reporting it directly. And anyone can go to the FinCEN website and take a look and read some information directly. And perhaps, I don't know if George still has anything else he'd like to add or if he's comfortable with the way I answered that. Thanks, Mark.
Anything else, George?
No, and I thought Rebecca's answer was good. I don't have anything else to add. Thanks, Mark.
Excellent.
Okay.
Sue, more questions?
Yeah, our next question, there's a couple of them related to this. They want to know the panel's thoughts on counter scamming the scammers. There's a couple folks on Twitch who do that. They want to know if you would advocate people trying to get email addresses, phone numbers, that type of thing, or just use the reporting mechanisms shared here today.
George, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know what the other people on the panel think. Maybe my view's a little more aggressive, and obviously it's just my view, but I would just be careful. I mean, I don't know what tools they're using, these people on YouTube and things. I haven't looked into it, but just be careful you don't get caught in your scam. But if you want to try to get as much information as you can, then that would help our investigation. That's fine, but I would just be careful of dealing with these people too much. So I would leave it up to your own individual comfort in doing those, but I wouldn't actively go and try to investigate it on yourself, you know, much past an initial look at it.
Eric, any other thoughts on that? I know that might be a case in some type of postal crimes.
No, I think George had some great tips there. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to remember that these people that are making these scam calls and scam solicitations, they are trained and they have a lot of experience. They talk to hundreds of people a day sometimes in a single day. So they have a lot of experience going through these things. So trying to think that you can one-up them might be a challenge because they're well versed in what they're doing. And if you give them even a little bit of information, thinking that you'll be able to get in over the hump now and kind of start seeing what this is about, you've probably given them too much information at that point. So be very careful not to give them anything if you want to go down that path. But that's why keep in mind, these people, they are well adapted to handling all sorts of pushback. And sometimes, in my personal experience, not to say that I haven't, you know, challenged a couple of them in my day, but, you know, they'll tend to be very rude and vulgar very quickly. And they can be very angry and unhappy with your attempts to do that. And they'll threaten all kinds of awful things about your safety and what have you. Or they could also just, again, try and get more information out of you, that it's even, you know, validating your phone number or something that could cause further strife for you. So it's a slippery slope that may not be worth your time. Leave it to law enforcement professionals to be able to figure those matters out.
Okay, thank you. The next question is the FBI doing anything to remove people's personal information from being sold on the dark web? And is that a possibility?
So as far as removing personal information, it's very difficult to do once it's out there and it's on the dark web. To get that information removed is extremely difficult. We do conduct investigations where we get information to try to proactively prevent fraud that we discover on the dark web. So getting that information out there and looking proactively at it, at who's actually posting that information and tracking that down is what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. And then just a note from one of our participants, they said utility cutoff scams seem to be on the rise too. I think we touched on that briefly.
Yep, especially in the winter and the summer. Be really cautious about utility cutoff scams coming from, and they often sound legitimate and will use the name of your actual utility company. Any other questions, Sue?
Well, we have a couple folks who have been victims of credit card fraud and reported it to their police department, but haven't had success and have been told that they don't have time to deal with internet crime. So would the recommendation be to just follow up at the sites provided here today?
I can talk on that briefly. So in regards to internet fraud and credit card fraud, a lot of times there are large criminal organizations that are responsible for that, and compiling all that information in one central location, which again, I would refer you to the Internet Crime Complaint Center, ic3.gov. Compiling all that information there will allow a larger case to be looked into and investigated either at a federal level or even at a state level if there's enough of activity that they can identify where that criminal organization is coming from. So that's the purpose of a central repository like the Internet Crime Complaint Center, is to compile all those complaints from throughout the United States and even internationally in one location so we can compile and start investigations.
Thank you. That's it, Mark.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sue, and great questions from the audience. Really appreciate those questions. Before we leave today, I'd really like to give each of our panelists just a quick opportunity to throw out a couple of quick reminders that they want to, that they might have not gotten to say during the presentation today, or they want to reiterate. So I'm going to start with you, Rebecca. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. There's just a couple things I wanted to share, and as my mother always told me, be brief, be bright, and be gone. So with that, I will try very hard to keep these very short. One thing to remember is that we talked about recognizing, refusing, and reporting today. And a key part of that is to recognize your own vulnerability, recognize the tactics fraudsters use, come up with a refusal script, something you always say when somebody contacts you to invest or be part of a scam. Have a set refusal script, which can be, I have to check with my friends at the FBI before I actually invest with you and I'll get back to you, or whatever your refusal script is. I'm somewhat rude, so mine's just a hang up. But again, it's that reporting as well. So recognize, refuse, report is what I'd like to leave you all with today. Thank you so much for having me.
How about you, Eric? What's the final reminder you'd like to leave with our group?
Well, one simple tip on so many of these scammers is that simple things like spelling errors and funny sounding government entities that they created, the Department of Redundancy Department, they'll often create these funny sounding government names. So just do a quick search and do your own research. Google can give you a lot of information. And the one benefit of these scammers affecting so many people is that there are probably hundreds or thousands of other people that have been contacted by the same entity that is contacting you. And so a quick Google search may discover that there's a lot of other people that have been fallen victim to the same scam. So you can use that as your red flag by doing a quick search. The other thing I want to end with is let people know that to Scott's last point about how we collate all of this data and how all of these federal agencies use all this data is a quick reminder that as federal law enforcement entities, our job is a little bit different than state and local entities. When you call and report a crime to your state and local entity and you file a police report and you get a police report number, you often expect a local detective to contact you soon and to follow up with you and work with you directly one-on-one to solve your issue, right? Well, as federal law enforcement, because we're looking at those huge batches of data with tens or hundreds or hundreds of thousands of victims or more sometimes, it's hard for us to contact everyone individually with a personal hand-to-hand thing. But just know that we are working on those cases and we will bring people to justice. We all have international liaison partners. We have postal inspectors stationed at Europol, and we have a attaché in Jamaica to deal with some of the lottery scams. And we bring successful cases with those. In fact, just recently for one of the magazine fraud scams that we worked, we had over 60 people arrested. We had over 183,000 victims in that case, and they built the elderly out of more than $335 million in one case. So can you imagine the scope that it takes for us to work a case like that? Well, we're working on it. Just trust us. But that's why we need your data. And every little report helps. So please report to us so we have that to be able to work our case. Thank you.
Awesome reminder and reporting, Eric. That it is so valuable. How about you, Scott? What are your final words?
So my final thoughts would just be to take time when you're involved in one of these scams or frauds. Take a few minutes to talk to your friends, talk to your relatives about it. A lot of times these scammers and fraudsters create this sense of urgency that you have to do something right now. You can't hang up the phone. You have to send the money. Take a few minutes, have that circle of friends that you trust, your family that you talk, and take the time to talk to them about what's going on so that you can actually have another person view it before you actually lose your money. You're working hard for your money to earn the money. Don't give it away so quickly. Don't give it away so easily. And make sure you're communicating with your parents, your grandparents, because a lot of them may not be aware of these types of scams that are out there. But if you have those conversations with them on a regular basis, we can prevent a lot of these from happening.
Thank you so much, Scott. Great advice. George, final words?
Yeah, I think almost everything has been covered, but my biggest one to reiterate would be that it's okay just to avoid contact with people you don't know. And I think sometimes we feel, like Rebecca was saying, that maybe that's rude and we should give people kind of the time of day, but all these calls that you get from numbers that you don't know, it's fine just not to answer. If someone really wants to get a hold of you, they will find a way to get a hold of you. It truly involves something with the IRS or with the Social Security Administration. They will get a hold of you eventually, but it's okay just to avoid, and then you avoid any temptation of even getting lured into any of these scams. So that would be my biggest thing, and kind of the way I try to do is just block these numbers of these various calls that come in, and unfortunately you're gonna have to do it over and over and over, but it's okay just to avoid contact altogether with people you don't know.
Thank you so much, George. And I would just want to thank again our entire panel of experts. You guys provided such valuable insight today. And on behalf of all of us, if you're looking at the screen right now, these are my final tips that I end every one of my presentations with, and they've been covered by all of our federal agents. And so I just want to end today's presentation with, trusting your gut. You have a lifetime of experience that can tell you if something's right or wrong. So if something doesn't feel right, trust your gut and disengage. It's really a critical step to take. You have a lot. You have more knowledge than you think in these situations. I'm going to pass it back to Dr. Don Millett to close our presentation.
Wow. What incredible information. I think about the fact that I have shared with people so many times, just don't answer it if you don't recognize the number. If they know you, they will leave a message. So I think that that's one of the things that I follow. And again, like a couple of you, I don't mind if I'm being rude. So that said, I personally just want to thank Mark, our moderator, for doing such a great job. Our speakers, Rebecca, Eric, Scott, and George. Again, like Mark said, such credible professional information related to scams and fraud. I'd also like to thank some behind the scenes people. Sue Smith is from the FBI Denver Citizen Academy Alumni Association, and she was the brainchild behind this particular event and also a major marketer for this event. So I want to give thanks to Sue. Also, I'd like to thank Leah Hafner. Leah is a community outreach specialist for the FBI Denver, and she helped coordinate the seminar content and our wonderful speakers. And then finally, I'd like to give a big shout out to my colleagues here at CSU, Eric Tisdale, Jen Garvey, and who are on our IT, and they also helped with the registration. And then Melissa Pickett, who has been our producer for this event and also done a lot of the marketing on the CSU side. So know that we couldn't have done it without any of you. I want to leave you with a few closing remarks. Whether you've been somebody who's already been impacted by fraudulent schemes or one of the lucky ones who has thus far avoided being scammed, we encourage you to stay informed, be prudent, be conscientious, protect yourself, ask for help, and report incidents that seem suspicious. And I'll leave you with an edited version of a couple of age-old quotes. If it's too good to be true, it probably is, and it very potentially could be fraud. So thank you all for attending. Stay safe and have a great holiday season.